The red star flag fluttered in the artificial breeze of the royal hangar, its crimson fabric catching the light of 3 distant suns, filtering through the reinforced dome ceiling. Eric Stone stood motionless beneath it, his broad shoulders squared and his face an impassive mask that revealed nothing of the turmoil within. "You understand the gravity of this assignment, Stone?" Admiral Thrace's voice was cold, clinical, like the sterile corridors of the Archemia royal palace that surrounded them. "Yes, sir." Eric's reply was equally devoid of emotion, a skill he had perfected during his 15 years as a soldier. First for Earth, then for whoever would take a human mercenary in a galaxy that viewed his kind as primitive newcomers, violent, unpredictable, and barely civilized. Princess Liara Velar must reach the Moonlight Gathering without incident. The future of the Wayora Alliance depends on it. Thrace's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Eric with unveiled suspicion. "You were chosen because, ironically, no one would expect a human to guard Archemia's most precious jewel. Your limitations make you invisible to those who might be watching." Eric swallowed the bitterness that rose in his throat. Limitations. A polite word for the prejudice that followed humans throughout the galaxy. In 3245, 2 centuries after Earth had joined the interstellar community, humans remained outsiders, tolerated for their physical resilience but excluded from the inner circles of power. "The princess embarks at dawn," Thrace continued. "You'll accompany her to the capital aboard the Stellar Whisper. Small crew, minimal attention. And after delivery, you return to your post. Nothing more." The Admiral's tone made it clear. Eric was a tool, not a confidant. "Remember, Stone, the Velar royal lineage stretches back 17 millennia. Their blood carries the wisdom of stars. You are merely shadow and shield." When Thrace departed, Eric allowed his shoulders to slump slightly. His reflection in the polished floor showed a man approaching 40. His once vibrant eyes, now dulled by years of following orders that were never fully explained. The scar that ran from his left temple to jawline, a souvenir from the Orion conflict, seemed to burn anew under the harsh lights. Memories of that day flooded back unbidden. The screams of civilians caught in the crossfire, the weight of a child in his arms as he ran through the burning settlement, his commander's voice ordering him to abandon the rescue mission. The choice he made that day had ended his military career on Earth, but saved dozens of lives. Now he guarded royals who never looked him in the eye. "Examining your flaws, human?" Eric turned to find a slender figure watching him from the shadows. The voice was melodic, carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of the Velar people. "Princess," he said, bowing stiffly, "I wasn't informed you'd arrived." Princess Liara stepped into the light, and despite his training, Eric felt his breath catch. The Velar were known for their ethereal beauty, but Liara transcended even that. Her skin held the faintest luminescent quality, as though starlight ran just beneath the surface. Her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and an impossible shade of violet, regarded him with none of the disdain he had come to expect from the nobility. "I dismissed my attendants," she said, approaching with a grace that made her seem to float rather than walk. "I wanted to meet my guardian without the court's watching eyes." Eric straightened, falling back on protocol. "I am Eric Stone, assigned to ensure your safe passage to the Moonlight Gathering." A smile played at her lips. "I know who you are. Eric Stone of Earth, former Lieutenant Commander of the Terran Special Forces, hero of the Orion conflict, exiled for disobeying orders to abandon civilians." He stiffened. "That information is classified, perhaps to most." She circled him slowly, her flowing silver robes whispering against the floor. "But I make it my business to know who stands between me and death. You need not concern yourself with my history, Your Highness, only my capability." "On the contrary," She stopped before him, close enough that he could see flecks of silver in her violet irises. I need to know if the man guarding me values life over orders. It seems you do. For the first time in years, Eric felt truly seen, not as a human, not as a soldier, but as the man he had once been, and perhaps still was, beneath the layers of discipline and disappointment. The Stellar Whisper departs at dawn, he said, retreating behind professionalism. I'll escort you from your quarters at 0500. Liara's expression softened with something like disappointment. As you wish, Guardian. Until dawn. Then, as she glided away, Eric released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Tomorrow would begin a journey across the stars, with a princess who saw too much and a past he couldn't escape. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, like an old friend, uncomfortable but familiar. Outside the palace windows, the three sons of Archemia began their slow descent, casting long shadows across the crystalline spires of the royal city. In 12 hours, he would embark on what should be a routine mission. He had no way of knowing it would change the course of not only his life, but of the entire Wayora alliance. The Stellar Whisper lived up to its name, cutting through the darkness of space with barely a sound. Its sleek design, reminiscent of ancient Velar sailing vessels, disguised the advanced technology that made it one of the fastest ships in the royal fleet. For all its splendor. However, the crew was minimal: a pilot, an engineer, and a handful of service droids programmed specifically for the princess's comfort. Eric stood at the viewport in the main cabin, watching the swirling nebula clouds of the Scylla sector drift past. 3 days into their journey, and the routine had become almost comfortable. Escort the princess to meals, stand guard during her meditation hours, patrol the ship's perimeter before she retired. Repeat. You always look so solemn when you think no one is watching. He turned to find Liara entering the cabin, dressed more simply today in a fitted silver jumpsuit that made her look less like royalty and more like a fellow traveler. Force of habit, Your Highness. Eric inclined his head respectfully. Must we maintain such formality when it's just the two of us? She moved to stand beside him at the viewport. I've been surrounded by people bowing and scraping since birth. It becomes tiresome. Eric hesitated. Protocol exists for a reason. Yes, to maintain distance. Her voice carried a hint of sadness. To remind everyone of their place in the grand scheme of things. But here, between stars, with only vacuum separating us from eternity, don't such distinctions seem rather small? Despite himself, Eric felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Spoken like someone who's never had to scrub plasma conduits as punishment for addressing an officer improperly. Liara laughed, the sound like crystal bells. Perhaps not, though I've endured my share of punishments for protocol breaches. When I was 12, I addressed the Centurion ambassador by his given name. I spent a month transcribing ancient legal texts as penance. A harsh sentence indeed. It was worth it to see his face. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. He'd been treating me like a decorative object rather than a person. Sometimes, rules must be broken to restore balance. Eric studied her, seeing beyond the royal facade to the woman beneath, intelligent, observant, and far more complex than her role allowed her to be. What is it you hope to achieve at the Moonlight Gathering? He asked, surprising himself with the directness of the question. If Liara was taken aback, she didn't show it. Instead, she turned fully toward the viewport, her profile illuminated by the distant stars. Officially, I am to participate in the ancient rituals, reaffirm Archemia's commitment to the Alliance, and begin formal negotiations for a political marriage to strengthen our ties with the Draconian sector. And unofficially? She glanced at him, something vulnerable flickering across her features. Unofficially, I hope to propose a new kind of alliance, one based not on marriages and treaties signed in blood, but on genuine cooperation. The old ways are failing us. Eric, the outer worlds suffer while the core planets hoard resources. Tensions grow. War looms. That's ambitious. Some would say naive, she sighed. Including my father, the king. He believes the traditional approach is the only way to maintain stability. But stability built on inequality is merely a prelude to collapse. Eric found himself nodding. I saw similar patterns on Earth before we achieved unified governance. The resistance to change nearly destroyed us. Exactly. Liara's eyes lit up. That's why the human perspective is valuable. Your species compressed millennia of development into centuries. You understand the cost of stubborn adherence to failing systems. Before Eric could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing them both against the viewport rail. Emergency lights flashed crimson, bathing the cabin in blood-red warning. "What's happening?" Liara gasped, regaining her footing with preternatural grace. Eric's combat instincts surged to the fore. "Stay behind me!" He drew the pulse pistol from his holster, scanning for threats as the ship shuddered again. The intercom crackled to life. "Guardian Stone!" It was Nia, the ship's engineer, her voice tight with stress. "We've hit a plasma storm. Shields at 60% and dropping. Need you in the engine room, now." "On my way." Eric turned to Liara. "Your Highness, proceed to your quarters and engage the emergency protocols." "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "That's not protocol?" Her chin lifted defiantly. "I'm trained in emergency procedures and basic engineering. The Velar do not raise helpless rulers." Another violent shudder ran through the ship, and the decision was made for them as the corridor to the royal quarters sealed automatically, emergency bulkheads slamming into place. "Stay close," Eric conceded, leading the way toward the engine room. They found Nia, a compact woman with the distinctive cranial ridges of the Athrosian people, frantically working at the engine controls. Sparks showered from an overhead conduit, and the acrid smell of burning circuitry filled the air. "The plasma storm appeared out of nowhere," Nia reported without looking up. "No warning from the navigational AI. It's like we flew straight into it." "That's impossible," Liara said, immediately moving to the auxiliary control panel. "These storms follow predictable patterns. They're mapped and monitored throughout the sector." Eric scanned the readouts, a cold suspicion forming. "Unless someone wanted us to hit it." Nia shot him a sharp look. "Sabotage?" "Possible. Check the navigational logs. See if there was any external interference with the AI's protocols." As Nia complied, Eric moved to the viewport. Outside, violent swirls of energized plasma battered the ship's shields, each impact visible as ripples of blue energy dispersing across the protective barrier. Beautiful, but deadly. "Shields at 40%, Liara reported, her fingers dancing across the controls with surprising expertise. "We can't withstand this much longer." Eric made a rapid calculation. "We need to drop out of FTL and change course." "If we do that, we'll miss the gathering," Nia warned. "There won't be time to reroute and still arrive by the celestial alignment." "Better late than atomized," Eric countered. Liara stepped away from the console, her expression troubled. "We can't miss the gathering. The consequences would be severe. Not just for me, but for the Alliance negotiations. Your life is worth more than a ceremony." "Is it?" Her violet eyes fixed on him with unexpected intensity. "My personal survival, weighed against potential conflict that could cost millions of lives if these negotiations fail." The ship rocked again, harder this time. A support beam tore free from the ceiling, crashing down toward the princess. Eric moved without thinking, tackling her to the floor and covering her body with his own as the metal crashed into his back. Pain exploded across his shoulders, but he barely registered it. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, looking down at Liara beneath him. Their faces were inches apart, her eyes wide with shock, not at the near miss, but at his instinctive protection. "I'm unharmed," she whispered. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then Nia's voice broke the spell. "I found something." The navigational systems were definitely tampered with. Someone programmed a subtle course adjustment that put us directly in the storm's path. Eric reluctantly pushed himself up, wincing at the pain in his back as he helped Liara to her feet. "Can you bypass the compromised systems?" "Already on it," Nia confirmed, her fingers a blur on the control panel. "But we'll need to manually stabilize the shield harmonics. The auxiliary controls are in the forward compartment." "I'll go," Eric said immediately. "No," Liara's voice was firm. "You're injured. I'll do it." "That's not happening, Your Highness." It wasn't a request, Guardian. Her tone carried every ounce of royal authority. "I know the Whisper systems better than you do. I've been traveling on ships like this since childhood." Eric opened his mouth to object again, but Nia cut in. "She's right, Stone. The princess has the technical knowledge, and you're bleeding." For the first time, Eric became aware of the warm wetness seeping through his uniform. The beam had done more damage than he'd realized. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly. "But I'm coming with you." Liara nodded. "Nia, can you hold things together here?" "Go!" the engineer urged. "We have maybe 10 minutes before the shields fail completely." They raced through the corridors, the ships trembling, growing more violent with each passing moment. Eric fought to ignore the pain radiating from his back, focusing instead on the slender figure ahead of him. For all her royal bearing, Liara moved with the surety and speed of someone trained for emergency situations. The forward compartment was already in chaos when they arrived, with warning lights flashing and system readouts scrolling too fast to follow. Liara immediately went to the main console and began inputting commands. "The harmonic stabilizers are completely misaligned," she reported. "I need to reset them manually and recalibrate the shield frequency to match the plasma storm's resonance." "In basic, please," Eric requested, positioning himself where he could watch both her and the door. "I need to make our shields vibrate at the same frequency as the storm," she simplified, not looking up from her work. "Then we can ride it instead of fighting it." Eric nodded, impressed despite himself. "Like surfing a wave instead of swimming against it." "Precisely." A small smile touched her lips. "Your Earth analogies are quite useful." The ship lurched again, more violently this time, and Liara was thrown against the console. Eric caught her before she could hit the edge, his arms encircling her waist. For a heartbeat, they remained frozen, the contact between them electric. "Thank you," she murmured, reluctantly pulling away to return to the controls. As she worked, Eric noticed something glimmering at her throat, a small, purple crystal pendant that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "That crystal," he said, more to distract himself from the pain than out of real curiosity. "I've never seen anything like it." Liara's fingers brushed it briefly. "It's a shard of the great crystal of Velar, given to me at birth. Our people believe it connects us to our ancestors and guides our spirits." Her voice softened. "I find it comforting, especially far from home." There was something in her tone, a loneliness that resonated with Eric's own sense of displacement. For all her privilege and power, Liara was as isolated in her way as he was in his. "Almost there," she reported, returning her full attention to the controls. "The shields are beginning to harmonize with the storm." Outside the viewport, the violent energy patterns indeed seemed to be shifting, flowing around the ship rather than battering against it. The stellar whispers trembling gradually subsided. "You did it," Eric said, genuine admiration in his voice. Liara turned to him, her face flushed with exertion and triumph. "We did it. I couldn't have reached the controls in time if you hadn't—" She broke off, her eyes widening as she looked at him properly. "Eric, you're pale. How badly are you hurt?" Before he could dismiss her concern, the intercom activated. "Princess, Guardian Stone," came Nia's relieved voice. "The shields are holding. We're riding the edge of the storm now. Should be clear in about 20 minutes. "Excellent work, Nia," Liara responded. "Have the medical droid meet us in the main cabin. Guardian Stone requires attention." "Unnecessary," Eric protested automatically. Liara fixed him with a look that brooked no argument. "You were injured protecting me. Accepting treatment is not optional, Guardian." As they made their way back to the main cabin, Eric found himself reevaluating the princess. Behind the regal facade and political training was a woman of remarkable competence, courage, and compassion. Qualities he hadn't expected to find in someone raised in the rarefied atmosphere of the Archemia court. In the main cabin, the medical droid efficiently treated the gash across Eric's back, applying regenerative gel that immediately began knitting the torn flesh. Liara watched the procedure with concern in her violet eyes. "The injury will heal completely within hours," the droid announced in its pleasant, modulated voice. "Though I recommend limited physical exertion for the next 12 hours. When the droid departed, Liara approached, her earlier confidence now tempered with a gentler emotion. "You risked yourself without hesitation. Why?" Eric met her gaze directly. "It's my duty to protect you." "Is that all it was, duty?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Eric looked away first. "We should examine the navigation logs more thoroughly," he said instead. "If someone tampered with our course, they may have left other surprises." Liara seemed about to press the issue, but then nodded, accepting his retreat into professionalism. "Yes, of course. Security must be our priority." As they set about checking the ship's systems, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The plasma storm had torn away the carefully maintained distance of rank and protocol, revealing two people who, despite their vastly different backgrounds, might understand each other better than either had anticipated. Outside the viewport, the last tendrils of the plasma storm dissipated, revealing the star-studded blackness of open space. The Stellar Whisper continued its journey toward the heart of the Alliance, carrying its royal passenger and her increasingly conflicted guardian. Neither could have predicted the greater storms that awaited them, both in space and in their own hearts. The Athros system loomed ahead, its ancient star burning a deep orange against the velvet backdrop of space. The Stellar Whisper had been diverted to this remote outpost after Nia discovered additional sabotage in the propulsion systems, damage that required repair before they could safely continue to the Alliance capital. "We'll lose 2 days," Nia explained in the ship's conference room, where Eric, Liara, and the pilot had gathered. "The repair facilities on Athros aren't as advanced as the main shipyards, but they're adequate for what we need. 2 days puts us dangerously close to missing the gathering," Liara noted, her brow furrowed in concern. "We'll have less than a day's margin for error." Eric studied the star charts projected above the table. "There's another concern. Athros lies on the edge of disputed territory. The military presence is minimal." "You believe we're still in danger?" Liara asked. "Someone went to considerable trouble to sabotage our ship," Eric replied. "I doubt they'll simply give up because their first attempt failed." The pilot, a taciturn Meridian named Vex, whose metallic skin reflected the room's lights in rippling patterns, spoke up. "The Athros outpost is neutral ground. Even pirates and outlaws respect its boundaries. We should be safe there." "Should be," Eric repeated skeptically. "I'd prefer certainties." Liara's violet eyes met his across the table. In the 5 days since the plasma storm incident, a subtle shift had occurred in their relationship. The formal barriers remained, but beneath them ran a current of mutual respect and, though neither would acknowledge it, something deeper. "What do you suggest, Guardian?" she asked. We maintain complete secrecy about your identity while on Athros. You'll pose as a merchant vessels officer, not royalty. No special accommodations. No distinctive clothing. Nothing that marks you as Velar nobility. The princess nodded thoughtfully. A sensible precaution. Though I should warn you, disguising my species entirely will be challenging. The Velar are distinctive. Not disguising, Eric clarified. Just downplaying. Many Velar travel as merchants and diplomats. You'll simply be one more, of no particular importance. I believe I can manage that, Liara said with a hint of amusement. I've often envied the freedom of my people who live beyond the palace walls. Arrangements were made quickly. Nia would oversee the repairs personally, while Vex handled the docking procedures and supply requisitions. Eric would remain at Liara's side at all times, posing as her business partner. As the others departed to prepare for arrival, Liara lingered in the conference room. You're troubled, Eric observed, noticing the slight tension in her shoulders. Perceptive of you, she sighed, moving to the viewport to watch the approaching planet. I've been studying the navigation logs. The sabotage was sophisticated, beyond what most mercenaries or pirates could manage. You suspect someone within the Alliance? Or within the Archemia Court itself? Her voice dropped lower. My proposal for restructuring the Alliance has powerful opponents. Some would prefer I never reach the gathering at all. Eric moved to stand beside her, close enough to speak privately, but maintaining a respectful distance. Have you shared these concerns with your father? My father. Liara's expression clouded. He loves me, but he's a traditionalist. He believes my ideas threaten the stability of a system that has endured for millennia. He would dismiss my suspicions as paranoia, born of political naivety. And is it? Eric asked carefully. Paranoia, I mean... She turned to him, her eyes suddenly intense. What do your instincts tell you, Eric Stone? You've seen more of the galaxy's darkness than I have. Am I imagining enemies where none exist? The use of his full name, spoken without titles or formality, caught him off guard. So did the genuine question, a princess asking a human mercenary for his unvarnished opinion. My instincts tell me that people rarely try to kill those who pose no threat, he answered honestly. If your ideas are dangerous enough to frighten those in power, then your suspicions are probably justified. Liara's shoulders relaxed slightly, as though his confirmation was a relief rather than a concern. Thank you for your candor. It's refreshing. Your Highness? Liara, she corrected gently. When we're alone, at least, if I'm to pose as an ordinary traveler, we should practice a more casual relationship. Eric hesitated. Years of protocol warring with the undeniable pull he felt toward her. Liara, he conceded finally, the name feeling both foreign and right on his tongue. We should discuss contingency plans in case we're recognized or confronted on Athros. Always the guardian, she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Very well. What did you have in mind? For the next hour, they developed emergency procedures and extraction routes, Eric drawing on his military experience, while Liara contributed her knowledge of alliance politics and potential allies on Athros. Throughout their discussion, Eric found himself increasingly impressed by her strategic thinking and practical approach. You would have made a formidable tactical officer, he commented, as they concluded their planning. In another life, perhaps. Liara tucked a strand of silver-white hair behind her ear. The paths of the Velar royalty are chosen before birth. My father was a warrior king in his youth. My mother, a diplomat. I was destined for politics from my first breath. And yet you seek to change the very system that created you. Perhaps because of it. Her gaze turned distant. I've seen both the beauty and corruption of power from the inside. The Velar teach that with privilege comes responsibility, not to maintain the status quo, but to strive for the highest good. A noble sentiment, Eric acknowledged, but one that often leads to conflict. All meaningful change does. She touched the crystal at her throat, which seemed to glow more brightly in response. Tell me, Eric, what do you want? When this mission is complete and you return to your post on Archemia, what future do you envision for yourself? The question caught him unprepared. For years, he had lived day to day, mission to mission, without allowing himself to consider a broader purpose or destination. I haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted. I don't believe that. Liara's eyes were knowing. A man doesn't survive what you have without some driving purpose. Eric moved away from the viewport, uncomfortable with her perception. At one time, I wanted to make a difference, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Idealism doesn't last long in mercenary work. Doesn't it? She followed him, undeterred. You threw yourself between me and danger without hesitation. That speaks of more than duty or training. Old habits, he dismissed. I think not. Liara stepped closer, near enough that he could see the subtle luminescence beneath her skin. I think that same man who defied orders to save civilians on Orion still exists. He's simply buried beneath layers of disappointment and resignation. Eric felt exposed, as though she could see through the carefully constructed walls he had built around his true self. It was unsettling and strangely liberating. Before he could respond, the ship's intercom activated. Approaching Athros Orbital Station, Vex announced. Prepare for docking procedures. The moment broken. Eric retreated behind professionalism once more. We should get ready. Remember, you're Lyra Vell, merchant officer. Nothing more. Liara nodded, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. As you wish, partner, she said, emphasizing the word with a hint of challenge. As she left to prepare, Eric remained in the conference room, troubled by the conversation. He had spent years perfecting the art of emotional distance, from his assignments, from his colleagues, from himself. Yet in less than a week, this alien princess had begun dismantling his defenses with disarming ease. More concerning still was the realization that he wasn't entirely opposed to their fall. The Athros orbital station appeared ahead, a sprawling construct of metal and crystal that serviced the mining operations on the planet below. Unlike the elegant architecture of Archemia, Athros Station was purely functional, a warren of docking bays, repair facilities, and trading posts catering to the eclectic mix of species who worked the planet's rich mineral deposits. Stellar whisper requesting docking clearance, Vex transmitted as they approached. Merchant vessel requiring propulsion repairs. Clearance granted, came the automated response. Proceed to Bay 47, Level 3. Transmitting approach vectors now. As the ship maneuvered toward its assigned berth, Eric joined Liara in the main cabin. He barely recognized the princess. Gone were the flowing silver robes and elaborate hairstyle, replaced by a simple jumpsuit in muted blue and a practical braid that emphasized the elegant length of her neck. She had even dimmed the natural luminescence of her skin through some technique of her people, making her appear more like an ordinary Velar than royalty. "Will I pass inspection?" she asked, noticing his surprise. "You look—" He searched for an appropriate word. "Different." A smile played at her lips. "A diplomatic answer. How very royal of you." Despite himself, Eric returned the smile. "The disguise is effective. Just remember to walk with less grace." "Are you suggesting I should slouch?" Liara asked, amused. "I'm suggesting that you currently move like someone who has never had to rush for anything in her life. Ordinary people hurry, stumble, take up space clumsily. They don't glide as though the floor exists merely to honor their footsteps." Liara laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that transformed her face. "That may be the most accurate description of royal deportment I've ever heard. Very well. I shall endeavor to be more human in my movements." "Careful," Eric warned, though his tone remained light. "That might be taken as an insult in certain circles." "Not in mine," she replied softly. The moment of camaraderie was interrupted by the gentle shudder of the ship docking. Security protocols activated automatically, and Eric checked his weapons, the standard pulse pistol, and, concealed in his boot, a vibroblade that could slice through most materials with molecular precision. "Stay close," he instructed, as they prepared to disembark. Athros Station is generally peaceful, but it attracts all types. The repair should take approximately 48 hours. During that time, we'll maintain a low profile and avoid unnecessary interactions. Liara nodded, slipping a small communicator into her ear. "Nia will update us on the repair progress. She's already arranged for the necessary parts to be delivered to the bay." The station's atmosphere hit them as soon as they stepped off the ship. A mixture of industrial lubricants, exotic foods, and the distinct odors of a dozen different species living in close quarters. The docking bay itself was cavernous, with maintenance crews swarming over vessels of various sizes and origins. Eric placed a protective hand at the small of Liara's back, guiding her through the crowd toward the main concourse. He felt her stiffen momentarily at the contact, then relax, allowing him to lead. "The station has 3 main levels," he explained quietly as they walked. "Upper-level houses administration and luxury accommodations. Middle level is general commerce and repair facilities. Lower level—" He hesitated. "Let me guess," Liara murmured. "The part we should avoid?" "Entertainment district," Eric clarified diplomatically. "Cantinas, gambling halls, pleasure houses. Useful for information, but potentially dangerous." They reached the central plaza of the middle level, a vast, circular space ringed with shops, food stalls, and service bureaus. The diversity of life was staggering. Hulking draconian miners with their scaled hides and multiple eyes. Delicate siren dancers whose translucent wings caught the artificial light. Even a few humans engaged in animated bargaining with insectoid merchants. "It's remarkable," Liara breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "So many different beings, all coexisting." "Out of necessity, if not always harmony," Eric observed. "The miners need supplies. The merchants need customers. The station needs both to survive. Self-interest creates cooperation where diplomacy often fails." A cynical view. A realistic one. People follow their interests. The trick is aligning those interests toward common goals. Liara gave him a curious look. "You sound like a political philosopher, not a soldier." "I've had a lot of time to observe the galaxy's workings," Eric replied with a shrug. "When you're often viewed as the lowest life form in the room, you learn to pay attention." A flicker of sadness crossed Liara's features. "The Alliance's treatment of humans is one of its greatest failures. Your species has contributed so much in such a short time, yet remains marginalized by ancient prejudices." "Save the reforms for the gathering," Eric advised, though her words warmed something within him. "For now, we need accommodation. Something modest but secure." They found suitable quarters in a mid-tier residential section, a simple 2-room unit with basic amenities and, most importantly, reinforced doors and no shared ventilation with adjoining units. Eric paid with untraceable credit chips, using one of his established cover identities. "Home for the next 2 days," he announced as they entered. Liara surveyed the Spartan accommodations, a small common area with nutrition station, and 2 sleeping chambers separated by a retractable divider. "Cozy," she commented without complaint. "You take the chamber on the right," Eric said, setting down their minimal luggage. "I'll sleep in the common area." "That won't be necessary," Liara countered. "The chambers are adequate. I insist you take proper rest." "Protocol." "We're beyond protocol now. Eric?" Her tone was gentle but firm. "If we're to maintain our cover as business partners, such arrangements would appear suspicious." He recognized the logic, but remained uncomfortable with the diminished security it represented. "I'll take the left chamber, then. But I'll need to sweep both rooms for surveillance devices first." As Eric conducted his security check, Liara explored their temporary quarters with undisguised curiosity, examining the utilitarian furnishings as though they were exotic artifacts. "You've never stayed in ordinary accommodations before," he realized, watching her inspect the nutrition station's limited offerings. "Is it that obvious?" she smiled ruefully. "The Royal House of Velar maintains diplomatic compounds on every major world in the Alliance. Even when traveling, we're insulated from everyday experiences." "And does this—" Eric gestured around the modest apartment. "Disappoint you?" "On the contrary." Liara sat on the edge of the simple couch, running her hand over its worn surface. "There's something honest about these quarters. They serve their purpose without pretense." Eric completed his sweep, finding no surveillance devices, a small relief. "We should contact Nia, check on the repair progress." The engineer's holographic image appeared above Liara's communicator. Her expression harried. "The damage was worse than I initially assessed," she reported. "The saboteur knew exactly where to strike. The quantum field stabilizers are completely fried." "Can they be replaced?" Eric asked, concern growing. "Yes, but the parts need to be custom fabricated. The station's facilities are processing them now." Nia ran a hand through her short hair. "Best estimate is 60 hours, not 48. Liara and Eric exchanged worried glances. "That puts us at serious risk of missing the gathering," the princess said. "I'm pushing them as hard as I can," Nia promised. "But rushing quantum components is asking for catastrophic failure mid-jump." "Keep us updated," Eric instructed. "And Nia, watch your back. Whoever sabotaged the ship might still be tracking us." After ending the communication, a heavy silence fell between them. Liara moved to the unit's small viewport, looking out at the industrial landscape of the station. "If we miss the gathering," she said quietly, "my proposal will die before it's even presented. The conservative factions will interpret my absence as weakness or disinterest." "There are other diplomatic channels," Eric suggested. "None with the same power." She turned to face him, her expression resolute despite the concern in her eyes. "The Moonlight Gathering occurs once every 7 years, when the alignment of the 3 sacred moons creates a conjunction considered blessed by all major alliance species. Agreements made during this time are believed to carry special weight. A superstition, perhaps, but one with profound political implications." Eric considered their options. "What if we found alternative transport? Surely there must be faster ships available for charter." "Possible, but risky. Word would spread that the Velar princess is seeking emergency transport. We'd be announcing our vulnerability to whoever tried to kill us." "Then we wait," Eric concluded reluctantly, "and prepare contingencies." Liara nodded, though tension remained visible in the set of her shoulders. "I should meditate, center myself for whatever comes next." "Of course." Eric moved toward the door. "I'll conduct a perimeter check of this level, familiarize myself with potential escape routes." "Be careful," Liara said, the simple phrase carrying more weight than its words alone would suggest. "Always am." Athros Station's corridors were a maze of intersecting pathways, color-coded by function rather than destination. Eric moved through them with practiced ease, noting security checkpoints, surveillance coverage, and population density. The station operated on a standard 30-hour cycle, currently in its daylight phase, when most businesses functioned at full capacity. He identified 3 potential evacuation routes, 2 emergency shelters, and 1 secure communication hub that could be used to contact Archemia if necessary. Satisfied with his reconnaissance, Eric was returning to their quarters when a familiar insignia caught his eye. On the sleeve of a tall, uniformed figure disappearing into a side corridor was the distinctive emblem of the Archemia Royal Guard, specifically the elite Phantom Division that answered directly to the military high command. Eric changed course immediately, following at a discreet distance. The officer, a major, judging by the rank markings, moved with purpose toward the lower levels, using his credentials to bypass standard security protocols. What is Archemia military doing here? Unreported? Eric wondered, his instincts screaming warning. No royal security detail had been mentioned in their mission briefing, and the officer was making no attempt to contact the Stellar Whispers crew. The major entered a secluded meeting area in the station's lower level, a private lounge attached to one of the more exclusive entertainment establishments. Eric positioned himself at a service alcove with a partial view of the interior, enhanced by the reflection in a decorative panel. Inside, the major met with two figures, one a hooded individual whose species Eric couldn't identify, the other, unmistakably a high-ranking draconian, his scaled ridge crest marking him as a member of their warrior caste. Though too distant to hear their conversation, Eric observed the exchange of what appeared to be data crystals and the consultation of star charts. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes before the participants departed in separate directions. Eric followed the major at a safe distance, tracking him to a small, unmarked vessel docked in a private bay. The ship bore no official insignia, but had the unmistakable lines of Archemia military design. A covert operation? Then. But authorized by whom? And why here? Now? He documented the ship's identification markers and the major's appearance before withdrawing, certain that his presence would soon be noticed if he lingered. As he made his way back to their quarters, Eric's mind raced through possibilities. The most concerning was that Archemia's military might be involved in the attempt on Liara's life, a palace conspiracy reaching to the highest levels. Alternatively, they could be conducting legitimate counterintelligence operations, perhaps even tracking the same saboteurs who had damaged the Stellar Whisper. But if so, why hadn't they made contact? When he returned to their temporary quarters, he found Liara emerged from her meditation, a serene expression on her face that quickly shifted to concern when she saw his expression. "What's happened?" she asked, rising to meet him. Eric relayed his observations, watching her reaction carefully. If the conspiracy reached into the royal family itself, even Liara might not be trustworthy, though everything in him rebelled against the thought. "Major Zoran," she identified immediately. "Commander of Special Operations for the Phantom Division, one of my father's most trusted officers." "You know him personally?" "Since childhood. He oversaw my combat training." Her brow furrowed. "But his presence here makes no sense. He should be at the capital, coordinating security for the gathering." "Unless his priorities have changed," Eric suggested carefully. Liara's eyes widened as she grasped his implication. "You think Zoran might be involved in the sabotage? That would mean a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of Archemia's military," Eric confirmed grimly, "possibly with connections to the Draconian faction. The same faction I'm supposed to begin marriage negotiations with at the gathering," Liara said softly, sinking back onto the couch. "This is worse than I feared." Eric sat beside her, protocol momentarily forgotten in the face of genuine threat. "We need to accelerate our departure. The longer we remain here, the greater the risk of discovery." "Agreed." Liara activated her communicator. "Nia, status update." The engineer's harried face appeared. "Making progress. I've convinced the fabrication team to prioritize our components by offering triple the standard rate." "We need to expedite further," Liara insisted. "Security concerns have escalated." "Understood. I'll see what I can do." Nia hesitated. "There's something else. The station's security system flagged an unauthorized scan of our ship's registry. Someone's checking our identity." Eric and Liara exchanged alarmed glances. "How long ago?" he demanded. 20 minutes. I modified our transponder signature immediately." But, but the damage may be done, Eric finished. Maintain alert status. We may need to execute an emergency departure. After ending the communication, a heavy silence fell between them. Liara's hand moved unconsciously to the crystal at her throat, her fingers tracing its facets in what Eric now recognized as a self-soothing gesture. If Zoran is involved, she said finally, then nowhere in Archemia territory is truly safe. My father is surrounded by potential enemies. One problem at a time, Eric advised, though the situation was indeed dire. First, we survive and reach the gathering. Then we can address the broader conspiracy. How can I present my proposals for alliance reform when the current power structure may be actively working to eliminate me? Liara's voice held an edge of despair he hadn't heard before. Perhaps that's precisely why your reforms are necessary, Eric suggested. Corruption thrives in closed systems. Opening the alliance to greater transparency and cooperation might be the only way to excise the rot. Liara looked at him with newfound appreciation. You continue to surprise me. Eric Stone. Behind the soldier's discipline lies a philosopher's mind. Just practical experience, he demurred, uncomfortable with her praise. I've seen enough failing systems to recognize the patterns. A soft chime from the door interrupted them. Eric immediately drew his weapon, motioning for Liara to move to a defensible position behind the nutrition station. He approached the door cautiously, checking the security monitor. Outside stood a young maintenance worker, a Throsian by appearance, holding a package and looking nervous. Delivery for compartment 347, came the muffled voice through the door. We didn't order anything, Eric called back, suspicious. Complimentary station welcome package, the worker replied. Required for all new guests. It could be legitimate or a perfect cover for an explosive device. Eric made a quick decision. Leave it by the door. We'll retrieve it later. I need a thumbprint confirmation of delivery, the worker insisted. Not standard protocol for a welcome package, Eric noted, his suspicion deepening. Step away from the door now. Instead of complying, the worker reached into the package with alarming speed. Eric reacted instantly, slamming the emergency lockdown button that sealed all compartment access points with reinforced barriers. We need to move, he told Liara urgently. Now. She was already in motion, gathering their essential items with remarkable efficiency. The emergency exit? Too obvious. They'll be watching it. Eric moved to the viewport, checking the external ledge that ran along the station's hull. This way. Using his vibroblade, he quickly cut through the viewport's locking mechanism, creating an opening just large enough for them to squeeze through. Outside, the narrow maintenance ledge offered a precarious path to the adjacent section. Stay close to the hull, he instructed, helping Liara through the opening. The gravity field extends only half a meter from the surface. They made their way carefully along the ledge, the vast emptiness of space yawning beside them, separated only by the station's invisible atmospheric barrier. Behind them, alarms began to sound. Their unauthorized exit had been detected. There. Eric pointed to a service hatch 20 meters ahead. Maintenance access to the central core. We can use it to reach the docking level undetected. They had almost reached it when the station's emergency lights activated, pulsing red warnings that bathed the exterior in crimson. Over the public address system, an automated voice announced, Security alert. Unauthorized personnel in exterior maintenance zones. All civilians please return to designated safe areas. They're locking down the station, Liara realized as they reached the hatch. Eric worked quickly to bypass the security protocols, his fingers dancing across the access panel with practiced precision. Almost there. The hatch slid open, revealing the cramped maintenance tunnel beyond. They squeezed inside just as a security drone rounded the curve of the station's hull, its scanning beams sweeping the area they had just vacated. The tunnel was barely tall enough to stand in, filled with conduits and control junctions that served the station's vast infrastructure. Eric led the way, navigating by memory from similar stations he had infiltrated during his military career. "We need to contact Nia," Liara said as they moved. "If Zoran knows we're here, the whisper isn't safe either." "Agreed. But we can't risk communication until we're in a secure location. All station channels will be monitored now." They continued through the labyrinthine maintenance system, descending toward the docking levels. Twice they had to hide as repair crews passed, and once Eric was forced to disable a security droid that blocked their path. "How much farther?" Liara asked, her composure remarkable despite the circumstances. The princess had proven surprisingly adept at emergency evasion, another unexpected dimension to her character. "2 more junctions," Eric replied. "Then we'll access the cargo processing system. From there, we can reach Docking Bay 47 through the supply tunnels." As they approached the final junction, a familiar voice echoed through the narrow passageway ahead. "Secure all maintenance access points. I want them found before they reach their ship. Major Zoran." Eric pulled Liara into a recessed equipment alcove, pressing them both against the wall as footsteps approached. She didn't question or resist, trusting his judgment implicitly. They stood in tense silence, bodies pressed together in the confined space, barely breathing as Zoran and 2 security officers passed within meters of their hiding place. "The princess must not reach the gathering," Zoran was saying. "The Alliance cannot withstand the reform she proposes. Centuries of tradition and stability would be undone by her naive idealism." "And if she escapes Athros?" one officer asked. "Contingencies are in place. The Draconian faction has assured me their operatives are positioned throughout the sector. One way or another, the Moonlight Gathering will proceed without Archemia's disruptive influence." The voices faded as the group continued down the tunnel, but their words remained, hanging in the air between Eric and Liara, like a physical presence. "You heard," she whispered, her face inches from his in the cramped hiding place. "I heard," Eric's jaw tightened. "Your own military, conspiring with foreign powers against the crown." "Against progress," Liara corrected, her eyes reflecting both hurt and determination. "Zoran believes he's protecting Archemia by stopping me. He sees himself as a patriot, not a traitor. His intentions don't make him less dangerous." "No, but they explain why the sabotage was designed to appear accidental. Zoran doesn't want to be seen killing the king's daughter, just preventing political change he considers destructive." Eric checked the passage before leading them out of hiding. "We need to reach the ship, now." They moved with renewed urgency, Eric's combat instincts fully engaged as they navigated the final stretch toward the docking bay. Liara kept pace without complaint, her royal training evidently including physical conditioning he hadn't anticipated. The cargo processing system was a massive automated facility where shipments were sorted, scanned, and prepared for distribution throughout the station. Conveyor systems and robotic arms moved crates and containers in a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency. "We'll use the cargo route," Eric decided, observing the flow of materials. "Those containers are headed for the docking level." They waited for an opportune moment, then slipped onto the conveyor system, concealing themselves among the larger shipping crates. The automated scanners registered them as anomalies, but, programmed only to detect contraband, continued the processing sequence without triggering alarms. "Clever," Liara commented as they rode the system toward the docking bays. "Though I confess this isn't how I imagined traveling as royalty." Despite the tension, Eric found himself smiling at her ability to find humor in their predicament. Consider it an authentic cultural experience. The conveyor delivered them to a sorting area 1 level above their destination. From there, they used a maintenance ladder to descend to the docking level, emerging in a service corridor adjacent to Bay 47. Eric activated his communicator on a secure, short-range frequency. "Naya, status report." "Guardian Stone!" The engineer's voice was thick with relief. "The station's crawling with security forces. They've established a perimeter around the Whisper, but haven't boarded yet, claiming standard inspection protocols. Zoran's people, Eric confirmed. Is the ship spaceworthy? Barely. I've installed the critical components, but we'd be limping to the capital at reduced speed. Better than not arriving at all. Prepare for immediate departure. We'll approach from the maintenance level. Understood. Vex is running pre-flight now. Eric turned to Liara. The most dangerous part comes next. The bay will be monitored, and we'll have to cross open ground to reach the ship. She nodded, determination evident in every line of her body. What's the plan? A diversion, then a direct approach. I'll create a security alert in the adjacent bay. When forces are diverted there, we make our move. And if we're spotted? Eric's hand moved to his pulse pistol. Then I do what I was assigned to do. Protect you at all costs. Something flashed in Liara's eyes, concern. Not for herself, but for him. Eric, this isn't the time for debate. Your Highness, he said, reverting to formality as he prepared for combat. When we reach the ship, you board immediately. Don't wait for me if complications arise. I will not leave you behind, she stated with quiet certainty. That is not a request. It is a royal command. Before he could argue, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a brief, electric contact that stunned him into silence. When she pulled back, her violet eyes held his with unwavering intensity. For luck, she whispered. Now let's both survive this, Guardian. The unexpected gesture left Eric momentarily speechless. His professional barriers crumbling in the face of emotions he had denied since their first meeting. But there was no time to process what had just occurred. The mission, her safety, had to take priority. With a curt nod, he moved to the adjacent bay's control panel and initiated an emergency sequence, triggering alarms that suggested a catastrophic pressure failure. As predicted, security forces responded immediately, rushing toward the perceived crisis. Now, Eric urged, leading Liara toward Bay 47. They sprinted across the docking area, keeping to the shadows where possible. The Stellar Whisper waited ahead, its boarding ramp still secured, but engines humming with pre-flight preparation. They had almost reached it when a voice rang out behind them. Princess Liara Villar, how disappointing to find you fleeing like a common criminal. Major Zoran stood 30 meters away, flanked by 4 armed officers. His aristocratic features were set in an expression of regretful determination. The disappointment is mine. Major, Liara replied, turning to face him with regal composure. To discover a decorated officer conspiring against the crown he swore to protect. I protect Archemia's future, Zoran countered. Your misguided reforms would destroy centuries of prosperity and stability. The alliance functions because each species knows its place, humans at the fringes, draconians in their sector, and the Velar at the center, maintaining the balance through strength and tradition. Eric had positioned himself slightly ahead of Liara, calculating angles and distances, assessing threats. 4 armed officers plus Zoran. Poor odds, but not impossible if he could create another diversion. The balance is already failing, Liara argued. The outer worlds suffer while the core planets hoard resources and power. The Velar were meant to serve the Alliance, not rule it through fear and tradition. Naive idealism, Zoran sneered. What the Alliance needs is stronger central authority, not dilution of power. The Draconian faction understands this, which is why your marriage alliance would have been acceptable, despite their ambitious nature. You mean their expansionist policies and history of subjugating lesser species, Liara corrected. This isn't about preserving Archemia, Zoran. It's about consolidating your own influence. The Major's expression hardened. Surrender now, Princess. I have no desire to harm you, only to ensure you miss the gathering. A regrettable diplomatic incident. Nothing more. Eric caught movement from the corner of his eye, Nia, at the ship's access hatch, signaling that the engines were ready. He made a subtle gesture in acknowledgement before addressing Zoran. Your career is already over. Major. Conspiracy against the royal family carries a penalty of exile to the dark sectors. Walk away now, and perhaps the king will show mercy. Zoran laughed. A cold, calculated sound. The human guard dog speaks as though his words carry weight. How appropriate that a primitive species would align with primitive politics. His hand moved to his sidearm. Stand aside, Stone. This matter is beyond your understanding. Eric tensed, ready to draw his own weapon, when Liara stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. Major Zoran, by the power vested in me as heir to the throne of Archemia, I charge you with treason against the crown and violation of your sacred oath. The crystal at her throat began to glow with increasing intensity as she spoke. You are hereby stripped of rank and privilege until such time as the High Council can convene to determine your fate. The formal declaration, delivered with unshakable conviction, caused a visible ripple of uncertainty among Zoran's officers. The Valar royal authority was not merely political, but cultural, woven into the very fabric of Archemia society. Your words mean nothing without the Council's confirmation, Zoran countered, though with less certainty than before. Men, secure the princess and her companion. As the officers raised their weapons, Eric made his move, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. His first shot struck the control panel for the bay's loading crane, sending the massive machinery into uncontrolled motion. His second hit the emergency lighting, plunging sections of the bay into darkness. Run! He shouted to Liara, providing covering fire as energy bolts filled the air around them. They sprinted for the ship, ducking and weaving as Zoran's forces recovered from the initial confusion. Nia had the boarding ramp lowered and stood ready at the entrance, her own service weapon providing additional cover. A bolt of energy seared past Eric's head, close enough that he felt its heat against his skin. Another struck the ramp near Liara's feet, sending sparks flying. They were almost at the ship when Eric heard Zoran's voice cut through the chaos. Target the engines! Don't let them leave! Eric turned in time to see Zoran himself, aiming a high-powered disruptor at the Whisper's exposed propulsion assembly. Without hesitation, he shoved Liara forward toward the ramp, then threw himself into the line of fire as Zoran discharged the weapon. The bolt struck Eric squarely in the chest, the impact throwing him against the ship's hull with bone-crushing force. Pain exploded through his body as the energy discharge disrupted his nervous system. He collapsed to the deck, aware of Liara's scream, but unable to respond as darkness closed in around him. The last thing he saw was Liara's face above him, her violet eyes wide with horror, and the crystal at her throat pulsing like a second heart. Then, consciousness fled, leaving only darkness and the fading echo of her voice calling his name. The darkness surrounding Eric was absolute, yet somehow alive, pulsing with currents of energy he could feel but not see. Pain had given way to a curious numbness, as though his body existed at a great distance from his consciousness. Am I dead? The thought formed and dissipated, lost in the formless void. Then, gradually, pinpoints of light appeared, violet stars in a black universe, arranging themselves into familiar patterns. The lights intensified, coalescing into a glowing purple crystal that grew until it filled his awareness. Within the crystal, he saw reflections, fragments of memory, both familiar and strange. A burning settlement on Orion, a child with violet eyes, looking up at him in terror as buildings collapsed around them. His younger self, lifting the child to safety as Valar royal guards rushed forward. You saved me once before. Liara's voice echoed through the void. On Orion. You didn't know who I was then, either. The realization struck Eric with stunning clarity. The child he had rescued during the Orion conflict, the action that had ended his military career, but haunted his conscience the least, had been Liara herself. A young princess, separated from her security detail during a diplomatic visit gone wrong. "I never forgot your face," her voice continued. "Though you were dressed in Earth military uniform then, not the palace guard's colors." The crystal pulsed brighter, and Eric felt a curious sensation, as though something was flowing from it into him, knitting together damaged tissue and repairing neural pathways disrupted by the energy weapon. "The crystal heart of Velar does more than connect us to our ancestors," Liara explained, though Eric couldn't tell if she was actually speaking or if her thoughts were flowing directly into his mind. "It amplifies our natural healing abilities. Among my people, it is forbidden to use this power for anyone outside the royal lineage. Another tradition I must break, it seems." Sensation began returning to Eric's body, first as distant tingling, then as more defined awareness of limbs and organs functioning again. The darkness receded gradually, replaced by the dim emergency lighting of a ship's medical bay. Liara's face came into focus above him, her features drawn with exhaustion but her eyes bright with relief. Her hands rested on his chest, the crystal between them pulsing in rhythm with both their heartbeats. "Welcome back," she whispered, her voice hoarse as though she had been speaking, or perhaps singing, for hours. Eric tried to speak, found his throat dry and uncooperative. Liara helped him sip water from a nearby cup, her touch gentle but trembling slightly with fatigue. "Zoran," he managed finally, "left behind on Athros, along with his loyal officers." The station authorities were confused by the conflicting claims of treachery, but ultimately deferred to royal authority. A small, triumphant smile touched her lips. "It seems even conspirators hesitate to directly imprison a Velar princess." Eric struggled to sit up, wincing as newly healed tissue protested the movement. "The ship? Our course?" "We're en route to the capital," Liara assured him. "Nia performed miracles with the propulsion system. We'll arrive just before the gathering begins, cutting it close, but still within the ceremonial time frame." Relief washed through him, followed immediately by professional concern. "You should be resting, preparing your presentation, not tending to a wounded guard." Something flashed in Liara's eyes, hurt, quickly masked by royal composure. "Is that all you are, Eric? A guard?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had fully acknowledged until now. The kiss before their confrontation with Zoran, the healing bond she had established, breaking sacred tradition, the recognition that their paths had crossed once before, years ago, in circumstances that had shaped both their lives. "I don't know what I am anymore," he admitted finally, the confession tearing free from a place deep within him. "When I took this assignment, I was a soldier following orders. Now, she prompted gently when he fell silent. Eric met her gaze directly. "Now I would follow you not because of duty or orders, but because I believe in what you're fighting for. A more equitable alliance. A future where species aren't defined by ancient hierarchies, but by their contributions and character." Liara's expression softened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "And if I asked you to stand beside me, not behind me, as I present these ideas to the gathering, what would you say then?" "I would say it's unprecedented. Humans don't address the High Council. We're barely tolerated in the outer chambers." "Precisely why your presence would make such a powerful statement." She took his hand, her slender fingers intertwining with his. "You've seen the consequences of the current system from both sides. As an Earth military commander, and as a soldier in Archemia's service, your perspective is unique and valuable." The offer was extraordinary, an elevation of status that would normally take decades of political maneuvering to achieve. Yet, Eric hesitated, aware of the potential consequences. "Your position is already precarious," he pointed out. "Presenting controversial reforms while standing alongside a human could undermine your authority with the traditional factions. Or it could demonstrate exactly the kind of bold, inclusive leadership the Alliance needs." Liara's chin lifted with familiar determination. Zoran and his conspirators fear change because they benefit from the current imbalance of power. But fear of change cannot dictate our future, not if we wish to survive as a united alliance. As she spoke, Eric was struck anew by the contradiction she embodied. A princess raised in the heart of tradition, who sought to dismantle the very system that had elevated her family for millennia. Not out of naivety or rebellion, but from a genuine vision of a better future. The sabotage and conspiracy prove how deeply the resistance to change runs, he cautioned. Zoran may be detained, but his allies remain throughout the alliance. Your life will be at risk. All meaningful change carries risk. Liara's free hand moved to the crystal at her throat. The Velar teach that true leadership requires sacrifice, not of others, but of oneself. Comfort, certainty, sometimes even tradition itself. The crystal pulsed between them, and Eric felt again the curious connection that had formed during his healing, a resonance between his consciousness and hers that transcended words. In that moment, he understood that regardless of protocol or propriety, their paths had become irrevocably intertwined. "Then I will stand with you," he said simply, "for whatever that's worth." "It is worth everything," Liara replied, with quiet certainty. "Now rest. We have much to prepare before we reach the capital." As she rose to leave, Eric caught her hand once more. "The child on Orion, that was really you." A soft smile touched her lips. "Yes, I was separated from my guards during the evacuation. You found me hiding in the ruins of the diplomatic compound and carried me to safety, against direct orders. As I later learned, I never knew I had saved the Archemia princess." "Would it have mattered if you had known?" she asked, curious. Eric considered the question honestly. "No," he decided. "A child is a child, regardless of species or status. I would have made the same choice." "And that," Liara said, squeezing his hand gently, "is why you are exactly who the Alliance needs to see, standing beside me." She leaned down and pressed her lips briefly to his forehead. "Rest now, Eric Stone of Earth. We have a galaxy to change when you wake." After she left, Eric lay in the dimness of the medical bay, contemplating the extraordinary turn his life had taken, from disgraced Earth officer to palace guard to... what? Advisor to a princess? Champion of reform? Or something more personal that neither of them had yet dared to name? The crystal's energy still hummed faintly within him, a reminder of the bond Liara had established against her people's traditions. Whatever came next, whether triumph at the gathering or further conflict with the forces opposing change, he knew with absolute certainty that he would stand with her, not merely as guardian but as partner in the truest sense. Outside the viewport, stars streaked past as the stellar whisper carried them toward their destiny at the heart of the Alliance. Eric closed his eyes, allowing healing sleep to claim him. His dreams filled with violet light and the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined when their journey began. The Alliance capital hung in space like a massive geometric jewel, its crystalline structures refracting the light of the nearby sun into prismatic patterns that shifted with hypnotic beauty. Unlike the industrial utility of Athros Station or the ancient elegance of Archemia, the capital represented the collaborative achievement of all major Alliance species, a neutral ground where power was theoretically shared equally. In practice, as Eric well knew, some species were considerably more equal than others. He stood at the viewport of the Stellar Whisper's main cabin, watching the massive space station grow larger as they approached. Despite his outward calm, tension coiled within him like a spring. The next few hours would determine not only Liara's political future, but potentially the direction of the entire Alliance for generations to come. "Nervous?" Nia asked, joining him at the window. The engineer had worked tirelessly during their journey, keeping the damaged ship functioning despite Zoran's sabotage. Cautious, Eric corrected. Zoran's conspiracy may extend into the capital itself. We'll need to be vigilant. Nia nodded, her expression serious. The princess has powerful enemies, but powerful allies too. I think. She gave him a meaningful look. Some found in unexpected places. Before Eric could respond, the cabin door slid open and Liara entered. Both Eric and Nia fell silent, momentarily stunned by her transformation. Gone was the simple attire of their journey. In its place, Liara wore the full ceremonial regalia of the Velar royal house, a flowing gown of liquid silver that seemed to capture and amplify the light around her. The bodice was inlaid with crystalline patterns that echoed the architecture of Archemia, while the sweeping train behind her rippled like mercury with each step. Her silver-white hair had been arranged in an intricate crown of braids, embedded with tiny purple crystals that mirrored the larger one at her throat. But more striking than the attire was the presence she projected, an aura of serene authority that filled the room like a physical force. This was not the woman who had laughed with Eric about slouching to appear ordinary, nor the determined fugitive who had escaped Athros station at his side. This was Princess Liara Velar, heir to the 17 millennia legacy of Archemia's ruling house. And yet, when her violet eyes met Eric's, he saw the same person he had come to know and care for beneath the royal facade. "The docking protocols have been transmitted," she informed them, her voice carrying the subtle harmonic resonance that the Velar adopted for formal occasions. "We have been granted priority clearance to the diplomatic birthing ring." "Any response to your message about Zoran?" Eric asked. "The High Council acknowledges the incident, but reserves judgment until after formal testimony." Liara's expression revealed nothing of her feelings about this measured response. "We are expected to proceed directly to the ceremonial chamber upon arrival. The moonlight gathering begins in 3 standard hours." Nia bowed respectfully. "The ship will be ready for departure whenever you require, Your Highness." "Thank you, Nia." Liara's formal tone softened. "For everything. Your skill and loyalty have been invaluable." When the engineer departed to oversee final docking procedures, Liara turned to Eric, studying him with an intensity that made him acutely aware of his own appearance. The palace had transmitted formal attire for him as well, a guardian's ceremonial uniform in deep blue with silver accents that echoed, though did not match, the royal colors. He wore it now, the fabric still stiff with newness. "You look—" Liara paused, searching for the appropriate word. "Uncomfortable," Eric supplied wryly. A smile touched her lips, briefly breaking through the royal persona. "I was going to say distinguished. The formal uniform suits you, though I suspect you'd prefer your combat gear." "At least that's designed for movement," he agreed. "This feels like it would tear if I had to draw a weapon quickly. Let us hope that won't be necessary." Liara moved closer, adjusting the ceremonial medallion at his collar, the emblem that marked him as a sanctioned royal guardian. Her fingers lingered perhaps a moment longer than protocol dictated. "Though, given recent events, I'm grateful to have you at my side, regardless of attire." The ship shuddered slightly as docking clamps engaged. Outside the viewport, the vast central spire of the Alliance capital loomed, surrounded by concentric rings that housed different governmental functions. At the very center, visible as a crystalline dome of unprecedented size, lay the ceremonial chamber where the moonlight gathering would take place. "Remember the contingencies we discussed?" Eric said quietly. "If anything seems wrong, we proceed with caution, maintaining multiple exit routes," Liara finished. "I haven't forgotten." Her expression grew more serious. "But Eric, we cannot allow fear to dictate our actions. The reforms I propose are too important to abandon out of caution." "Survival first," he countered, Change requires living reformers. The familiar debate hung between them, neither willing to concede fully to the other's position. It was one of many ways they balanced each other, his pragmatic caution against her visionary determination. The ship's intercom activated. "Final docking complete," Vex announced. "Royal reception delegation approaching the main airlock." Liara took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring almost imperceptibly beneath the elaborate gown. It begins. As they moved toward the airlock, Eric found himself hyper-alert, cataloging every detail of their surroundings. The reception would be the first potential vulnerability, the moment when they transitioned from the relative security of the ship to the unknown variables of the capital. "Stay close," he murmured as the airlock cycled open. Beyond it waited a delegation of a dozen officials representing the major alliance species, draconians with their scaled crests, ethereal sirene with translucent wings, hulking meridians with metallic skin, and others less common. Notably, there were no humans among them. At the delegation center stood an elderly Velar male, whose facial structure bore a striking resemblance to Liara's, though his skin had faded to the pale, opaque white of advanced age. The crystal at his throat, larger and more ornate than Liara's, pulsed with steady blue light. "Uncle Talon!" Liara greeted him with formal deference, inclining her head precisely the correct number of degrees for a blood relative of senior rank. "Princess Liara," he returned, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonic resonance of the Velar, though more pronounced with age. "The royal house of Archemia welcomes you to the capital. Your journey, I understand, encountered difficulties. Nothing that could not be overcome with loyal assistance," she replied diplomatically, her eyes briefly meeting Eric's. Talon's gaze followed hers, his ancient eyes narrowing slightly as they assessed the human guardian. "Indeed. The Council has received your preliminary report regarding Major Zoran's actions. Most concerning. Most treasonous," Liara corrected gently but firmly. As the full testimony will make clear, a subtle tension rippled through the delegation at her words. Eric noted the reactions carefully, particularly the slight stiffening of the draconian representative's posture. If Zoran's conspiracy extended into the draconian faction, as their evidence suggested, the gathering had just become even more dangerous. "All will be addressed in proper time," Talon said smoothly. "For now, you must prepare for the ceremony. The 3 moons approach alignment, and tradition demands precise observance." "Of course, Uncle." Liara gestured slightly to Eric. "My guardian will accompany me throughout the preparations. Recent events have demonstrated the wisdom of enhanced security." Talon's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Surely the royal chambers within the capital provide adequate protection." "I trust Guardian Stone with my life," Liara interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument despite its polite phrasing. "Where I go, he goes. This is not a subject for debate." For a moment, uncle and niece regarded each other in silent contest of wills. Then, Talon inclined his head in acquiescence. "As you wish. The royal procession departs in 1 standard hour. Please follow ceremonial attendant Vela for preparation." As the delegation escorted them through the sweeping corridors of the diplomatic ring, Eric maintained his professional demeanor while absorbing every detail of their surroundings. Security protocols, personnel distributions, potential choke points and escape routes, all cataloged automatically from years of training. They were led to the Royal Preparation Chambers, a suite of rooms reserved exclusively for visiting nobility. The opulence was striking even by Archemia standards, with living crystal formations that grew from the walls and ceilings, creating ever-changing patterns of light and color. When the attendants withdrew, leaving only Vela, a middle-aged Velar woman with the distinctive facial markings of a lifelong ceremonial servant, Liara's formal posture relaxed slightly. My uncle seems displeased by your presence, she noted to Eric, her voice low enough that only he could hear. The feeling is mutual, Eric replied dryly. He was measuring me for an airlock the entire introduction. Despite the tension, Liara smiled. Talon is traditional, even by Velar standards. The idea of a human guardian standing with the royal heir during a sacred ceremony likely gives him palpitations. Will he pose a problem for your proposals? Undoubtedly. Her expression grew more serious. Talon has served on the High Council for over 2 centuries. He values stability above all else, even progress. The ideal ally for Zoran's conspiracy, Eric observed. Perhaps, though I doubt my uncle would directly sanction violence. Liara moved to the crystalline window that overlooked the vast central plaza of the capital. Below, representatives from across the Alliance gathered, their diverse forms creating a living mosaic of galactic civilization. He would oppose change through political means, not assassination. Unless he believed the stakes justified extreme measures, Eric countered, joining her at the window. Revolution often begins with reforms that seem moderate to their proponents, but existential to their opponents. Liara gave him a curious look. You continue to surprise me with your insights, Guardian. I've witnessed enough political transitions to recognize the patterns, he said simply. Often, from the wrong end of a weapon. Their conversation was interrupted as Vela approached, bowing deeply. Your Highness, the final ceremonial preparations must begin now if you are to join the procession on time. What followed was an elaborate ritual that Eric observed with fascination despite his vigilance. Liara was guided through a series of symbolic ablutions, each representing the purification of intent before addressing the gathering. Her already elaborate attire was supplemented with additional ceremonial elements, a flowing cape that seemed to capture starlight within its fabric, and a delicate circlet that nested among her braided crown. Throughout the process, Liara maintained perfect composure, reciting ancient Velar incantations with flawless pronunciation while performing the prescribed ritual movements. Yet, Eric could sense the tension beneath her serene exterior. Not nervousness about the ceremony itself, but determination regarding what would follow. When the preparations were complete, Vela stepped back, admiration evident in her expression. You honor the 17,000 generations that preceded you, Your Highness, she said reverently. May the wisdom of the ancestors guide your words tonight. Thank you, Vela, Liara responded with genuine warmth. Your service honors our traditions. When the attendant withdrew to summon the procession guards, Liara turned to Eric, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. How do I look? She asked. The simple question, startling in its ordinariness after the elaborate ritual. Eric studied her, the ethereal glow of her skin enhanced by ceremonial essences, the perfect arrangement of her silver-white hair beneath the ancient circlet, the flowing gown that seemed to exist somewhere between solid and liquid. But beyond the physical splendor, he saw the woman he had come to admire, brilliant, determined, and surprisingly genuine beneath the weight of tradition and expectation. Like someone about to change the course of history, he answered honestly. A soft smile touched her lips. That remains to be seen. Her hand moved to the crystal at her throat, the gesture he now recognized as her centering ritual. Whatever happens in the ceremonial chamber, Eric, I want you to know that meeting you has changed me. Your perspective has strengthened my conviction that the Alliance must evolve beyond its ancient hierarchies. I'm just a soldier, he demurred. No. Her violet eyes held his with unexpected intensity. You are far more than that. You are proof that courage and honor are not bound by species or status. The Alliance needs that reminder now more than ever. Before he could respond, a melodic chime sounded, signaling the arrival of the procession. Liara straightened, the momentary personal connection receding behind royal composure. It's time, she said, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of formal Velar speech once more. Remember, regardless of custom, you are to remain at my side throughout the ceremony. If anyone objects, refer them to my direct authority. Understood, Your Highness? As the doors opened and the procession members assembled, resplendent in ceremonial attire representing a dozen different worlds, Eric took his position slightly behind Liara's right shoulder. The formation placed him precisely where he needed to be, close enough to protect her instantly, yet respectfully positioned according to protocol. The procession began its stately progress through the grand corridors of the capital, moving from the diplomatic ring toward the central spire. Ceremonial musicians led the way, playing ancient instruments that produced hauntingly beautiful harmonies. Behind them came standard-bearers carrying the emblems of the founding Alliance worlds, followed by religious functionaries whose species Eric couldn't identify beneath their elaborate vestments. Then came Liara, her presence commanding the attention of all they passed. Eric noticed the reactions as they processed, the expected deference, but also flickers of surprise or disapproval, as observers noted the human guardian in such close proximity to Archemia royalty. He ignored the looks, focusing instead on scanning for threats, ceremonial or not. The procession represented a security nightmare, a pre-announced route, a high-value target, and limited maneuverability due to the formal pace and crowded conditions. They had almost reached the central spire when Eric's instincts prickled. A movement in the observing crowd, subtle but wrong somehow. His gaze sharpened, focusing on a hooded figure whose stance seemed unnaturally tense compared to those around them. As the figure's hand moved beneath their robe, Eric reacted without hesitation. He closed the distance to Liara in 2 rapid steps, placing himself directly between her and the potential threat. Security concern, 3 o'clock. Hooded observer, he murmured. His body tensed for action, while maintaining the appearance of ceremonial formality. Liara gave no outward sign of alarm, continuing her measured pace while responding quietly. Options. Accelerate to the security checkpoint ahead. I'll cover your flank. She gave the slightest nod, then gradually increased her pace, not enough to appear panicked, but sufficient to bring them more quickly to the secured entrance of the central spire. The procession members adjusted smoothly, perhaps assuming the princess was simply eager to reach the gathering on time. Eric kept his gaze locked on the hooded figure, who had begun moving parallel to the procession, maintaining position despite the increased pace. His hand drifted to the ceremonial weapon at his side, functional despite its ornate appearance. They were 10 meters from the security checkpoint when the figure made their move, pushing suddenly through the crowd toward the procession. Eric stepped forward, weapon half drawn, only to freeze in confusion as the figure threw back their hood to reveal a child, a young Velar girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, clutching what appeared to be a ceremonial offering. "Princess Liara!" the child called out, her voice high and clear. "A blessing for your address." The procession guards moved to intercept, but Liara raised a hand, halting them. "Let her approach," she commanded, to the visible discomfort of the security detail. The child came forward, bowing with the awkward formality of youth, before presenting her offering, a small, crystal sculpture in the shape of a heart, purple like Liara's own crystal, but clearly fashioned by amateur hands. "The children of the outer settlements made this," the girl explained earnestly, "to show we believe in your vision for a better alliance." Liara accepted the gift with genuine warmth, kneeling despite her elaborate attire to address the child at eye level. "What is your name, young one?" "Alara, Your Highness. My family came from Nalaris colony, one of the disputed outer worlds," Liara noted, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Your journey must have been difficult." "Father says it was worth it," the child replied with disarming directness. "He says you're going to make sure no more colonies get forgotten like ours was." Something shifted in Liara's expression, a deepening of resolve, a strengthening of purpose. I will certainly try. Elara of Nalaris. She touched the child's shoulder gently. Your gift honors me more than you know. As the procession continued, Liara kept the small crystal heart, clutched in her hand, alongside her ceremonial scepter. The brief interaction seemed to have affected her profoundly, adding a new dimension to her already formidable determination. I apologize for the overreaction, Eric said quietly, as they passed through the security checkpoint into the central spire. Never apologize for caution, Liara replied. Better a false alarm than a successful assassination. She glanced down at the crude crystal heart. Besides, some interruptions carry their own purpose. The central spire's interior was a marvel of Alliance engineering, a series of concentric chambers rising toward the massive dome at its peak. Gravity varied subtly between levels to accommodate the different physiological needs of various species, while the atmosphere itself shifted in composition, creating microenvironments within the unified structure. As they ascended toward the ceremonial chamber, the procession grew larger, joined by dignitaries and representatives from throughout the Alliance. Eric noted the political dynamics at play, which factions clustered together, which maintained distance from one another, which positioned themselves strategically near the Archemia contingent. The Draconian delegation was particularly worth watching. A dozen scaled humanoids whose elaborate cranial crests signified their warrior caste status. Their leader, Supreme War Master Krell, moved with the controlled power of a predator, his yellow eyes constantly assessing everyone around him. If Zoran's conspiracy extended into the Draconian hierarchy as they suspected, Krell would be a likely connection. Finally, they reached the ceremonial chamber itself, a vast circular space beneath the transparent dome, designed to capture and amplify the light of the three moons as they moved toward alignment. Already, 2 of the moons were visible through the dome, their combined illumination casting silver-blue light across the assembled dignitaries. The chamber was arranged in concentric circles, with the most powerful Alliance members occupying the innermost ring. Archemia's position of prominence was immediately apparent, a raised dais directly beneath the point where the 3 moons would align, adorned with the ancient symbols of the Velar royal house. As Liara took her place on the dais, Eric positioned himself precisely where they had discussed, not behind her as tradition would dictate, but slightly to her side, visible to all as an equal participant rather than a subservient guardian. The break from protocol was subtle but unmistakable, drawing curious and sometimes disapproving glances from the assembled dignitaries. Talon, already present and seated among the High Council members, frowned visibly at the arrangement, but made no public objection. The ancient Velar's crystal pulsed with a rhythm that seemed slightly out of sync with Liara's, a physical manifestation of their ideological disconnect. The ceremonial proceedings began with ritual invocations in a dozen different languages, each representing a founding member of the Alliance. Time-honored protocols were observed with meticulous precision, from the lighting of the eternal flame to the exchange of ancestral vows. Throughout it all, Liara performed her role flawlessly, honoring traditions that stretched back millennia while subtly preparing the ground for the changes she would soon propose. Eric remained vigilant at her side, aware that the ceremony's predictable structure would provide a perfect opportunity for any planned attack. As the final ritual concluded, the 3rd moon became visible through the dome, moving slowly but inexorably toward alignment with its companions. A hush fell over the chamber as the momentous conjunction approached, the rare celestial event that occurred only once every 7 years and held such cultural significance for the Alliance members. The High Chancellor of the Council, a venerable Meridian whose metallic skin had darkened to deep bronze with age, rose from his central seat. "The sacred alignment approaches," he intoned, his voice amplified by the chamber's perfect acoustics. "As has been our tradition since the founding of the Alliance, we now hear the voices of those who would shape our collective future. Who seeks to address the gathering? This was the moment. The ceremonial opening for proposals and declarations that would shape alliance policy until the next gathering. Traditionally, speakers were called in order of their world's seniority within the alliance, with Archemia always granted first position. Liara rose gracefully from her seat, the crystal at her throat pulsing with vibrant energy that seemed to intensify as the moons drew closer to alignment. I, Princess Liara Velar, heir to the throne of Archemia and keeper of the 17th millennium, seek to address the gathering, she declared, her voice carrying the formal harmonics of royal Velar speech while remaining clear and powerful. The voice of Archemia is recognized, the Chancellor acknowledged with a deep bow. Approach the circle of declaration. Liara moved forward to the circular platform at the chamber's center, directly beneath the nearly aligned moons. Eric followed, maintaining his position at her side, despite the murmurs this non-traditional movement provoked. The Chancellor paused, clearly uncertain how to address this departure from protocol. Guardian, he said finally, the circle is reserved for the recognized speaker alone. The Guardian stands with me by my command, Liara stated firmly. Not behind, not beneath, but alongside, as befits the new alliance I envision. The declaration sent a ripple of reaction through the chamber. Surprise, confusion, outrage from traditionalists, and cautious interest from others. Eric maintained his professional demeanor, though inwardly he marveled at Liara's courage. With a single statement, she had established the foundation of her proposed reforms before even beginning her formal address. Above them, the three moons moved into perfect alignment, sending a shaft of intensified light through the dome to illuminate the circle of declaration. In that silver-blue radiance, Liara seemed transformed, not just a princess performing a ceremonial function, but a visionary prepared to challenge millennia of established order. Members of the Alliance, she began, her voice clear and strong. For 17,000 years, the worlds of our union have prospered through cooperation and shared purpose. From the founding Concord to the present day, we have recognized that our diverse species achieve more together than apart. She paused, allowing her gaze to travel around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from various factions. Yet despite this foundational truth, we have maintained a system of governance that perpetuates ancient hierarchies. Core worlds prosper, while outer colonies struggle. Founding species dominate while newer members remain marginalized. Resources flow inward rather than outward. Power concentrates rather than distributes. Murmurs rose from various delegations, some approving, others distinctly not. Eric noted the draconian contingent exchanging glances, their expressions unreadable to most, but recognizable to him as calculating reassessment. I stand before you today not merely as Archemia's heir, but as a citizen of our shared galaxy who believes the time has come for transformation. Liara's voice gained strength as she continued, the crystal at her throat pulsing in rhythm with her words. I propose a fundamental restructuring of alliance governance, one that preserves our unity while distributing both power and responsibility more equitably among all member worlds. She gestured to the data crystals that began projecting detailed schematics and proposals above the circle. The images rotated slowly, allowing all present to examine the comprehensive reforms she had developed. My proposal includes three core elements. First, a rotational council leadership that ensures all sectors have regular access to executive authority. Second, a resource distribution system that prioritizes development of outer worlds, rather than concentration at the center. And third, a reconsideration of species categorization that eliminates the hierarchical tiers established during the First Concord. This last point provoked the strongest reaction, gasps and mutters from the traditional powers, approving murmurs from the representatives of newer alliance members. The hierarchical species classification had long been a source of tension, with humans near the bottom of the established order, despite their rapid technological advancement and cultural contributions. I recognize these proposals represent significant change, Liara acknowledged, her tone measured but unwavering. Change often inspires fear. Fear of lost privilege, fear of unknown consequences, fear of destabilizing systems that have endured for millennia. She paused, then gestured to Eric beside her. Yet consider this human who stands at my side. Guardian Eric Stone, former Earth military commander, hero of the Orion conflict, and the individual who saved my life, not once, but twice. According to our traditional hierarchy, he belongs at the margins of our society. According to our traditional protocols, he should stand behind me, not beside me. Eric maintained his composed expression, though he hadn't expected to become such a central example in her address. He could feel the scrutiny of thousands of eyes as representatives from across the Alliance assessed this human who dared to stand as equal to Archemia royalty. But I ask you this, Liara continued, her voice lowering slightly, so that the audience leaned forward to catch her words. If our traditions prevent us from recognizing merit regardless of origin, if our protocols value ancient bloodlines over demonstrated courage and loyalty, then what purpose do they truly serve? To protect our collective future, or merely to preserve an order established when many of our current members had not yet reached the stars? The third moon reached perfect alignment with its companions, sending intensified light cascading through the chamber. In that moment, Liara seemed to glow from within, the crystal at her throat pulsing with extraordinary brilliance. The Alliance was founded on a vision of unity through diversity, she declared, her voice rising with passion, yet maintaining the formal harmonics that gave her words ritual significance. Not uniformity imposed by hierarchy, not stability maintained through inequality, but true cooperation among equals, each contributing according to their unique strengths. She raised the small crystal heart given to her by the child from Nalaris colony. This was created by the children of an outer colony, young citizens who believe in an alliance that values them as much as those born in ancient capitals. Their hope, their expectation, is that we who gather here beneath the aligned moons will have the wisdom and courage to build a future worthy of their trust. Throughout the chamber, reactions varied dramatically, from enthusiastic support among the representatives of newer Alliance members to stone-faced resistance from traditional powers. The Draconian delegation appeared particularly disturbed, with War Master Krell engaged in intense, whispered consultation with his advisors. Eric maintained his vigilance, watching for any sign that opposition might escalate beyond political disapproval to physical threat. The chamber's security protocols were extensive, but he had learned through bitter experience that determined assassins could overcome almost any barrier. As Liara prepared to detail the specific implementation of her proposed reforms, a commotion erupted at the chamber's entrance. Guards moved quickly to intercept someone attempting to force their way into the ceremonial proceedings. Eric tensed, positioning himself to shield Liara if necessary, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," she murmured. "Let's see who dares interrupt." The disturbance resolved into a single figure, being reluctantly escorted by Capitol security. A disheveled Velar male in the tattered remains of what had once been an Archemia military uniform. "Major Zoran," Liara identified, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearest the circle. Eric's hand moved to his weapon, but again, Liara subtly restrained him. "This may work to our advantage," she whispered. "Stay alert, but don't act prematurely." Zoran looked nothing like the composed, aristocratic officer they had confronted on Athro Station. His uniform was scorched and torn, his typically immaculate appearance replaced by desperation. Most telling was his crystal pendant, no longer glowing with steady blue light but flickering erratically, suggesting profound emotional disturbance. "I demand to be heard," Zoran shouted, struggling against the guards who held him. "The princess conspires against the Alliance. Her reforms are a mask for revolution. The High Chancellor rose from his seat, outrage evident in his metallic features. "This is an unauthorized interruption of sacred proceedings. Remove this individual immediately." "No!" Zoran broke free from his captors, staggering forward several steps before being restrained again. "You must listen. The Draconian faction knows the truth. Ask them about the agreement. Ask them what was promised in exchange for Archemia's weakening." A profound silence fell over the chamber as all eyes turned to the Draconian delegation. War Master Krell had gone utterly still. His yellow eyes narrowed to slits, and his scaled crest fully extended in what Eric recognized as a combat-ready posture. Liara seized the moment with masterful political instinct. "Perhaps Major Zoran should indeed be heard," she suggested, her voice carrying the perfect blend of confidence and reasonable concern. "If there are agreements regarding Archemia that the Council has not been informed of, this gathering is the appropriate time for transparency." The Chancellor hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining ceremonial order and addressing the serious accusation that had been raised. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "As is conspiracy against a founding member world," Liara countered smoothly. "I formally request that Major Zoran be permitted to address the gathering, so that his claims may be evaluated by all." After brief consultation with other council members, the Chancellor reluctantly nodded. "Approach the outer circle," he instructed Zoran. "You may speak briefly, but be warned, false accusations before the gathering carry severe consequences." As Zoran was escorted to a position at the chamber's periphery, Eric leaned closer to Liara. "This is dangerous," he murmured. "Zoran is unstable, possibly desperate enough to attempt anything." "Precisely why we must let him speak," she replied quietly. "Better to expose the conspiracy publicly than allow it to continue operating in shadow." Zoran stood in the outer circle, his posture rigid despite his disheveled appearance. "Members of the Alliance," he began, his voice strained but carrying clearly through the chamber. "I come before you not as a traitor, but as a patriot. The reforms proposed by Princess Liara would dismantle the very foundation of our civilization, the hierarchical order that has maintained peace for 17 millennia. He gestured accusingly toward the Draconian delegation. "Ask War Master Krell about the agreement reached 3 standard months ago, a pact between traditional Archemia factions and the Draconian military high command. Ask him what territorial concessions were promised once the disruptive influence of the princess was eliminated and a more traditional ruler took her place." Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the chamber. The accusation was extraordinary, suggesting not merely opposition to Liara's reforms, but an active conspiracy involving foreign powers and planned assassination. War Master Krell rose from his seat, his massive scaled form towering over nearby delegates. "These are the ravings of a failed operative," he dismissed, though Eric noted the tension in his stance. "The Draconian hegemony maintains appropriate diplomatic relations with all Alliance members, including Archemia." "Show them the communications," Zoran demanded, growing more agitated. "The Phantom Division has records of every transmission between your military command and our conservative faction. The agreement to remove the princess and replace her with a more cooperative ruler in exchange for control of the Nalaris sector." At the mention of Nalaris, the home colony of the child who had given Liara the crystal heart, Eric saw Liara's expression harden. The pieces were connecting: the suffering outer colony, the child's journey to the capital, the conspiracy that apparently targeted not just Liara's reforms, but the vulnerable world she sought to protect. "These accusations require investigation," the Chancellor declared, attempting to regain control of the increasingly chaotic proceedings. "The Council will convene a special tribunal." "There's no time for tribunals," Zoran interrupted, his desperation evident. "The operation is already in motion. Why do you think I escaped detention? To warn you before—" He never finished the sentence. A pulse of energy struck him squarely in the chest, emanating from somewhere in the upper gallery. Zoran collapsed instantly, his crystal shattering as he hit the floor. Chaos erupted. Security forces converged on the fallen major and began scanning for the source of the attack. Delegates rushed for cover or exits, ceremonial dignity forgotten in the face of immediate danger. Eric reacted instantly, pulling Liara down and shielding her with his body as he scanned for additional threats. "We need to move," he urged. "Now." But Liara's attention was fixed on the draconian delegation, where War Master Krell was making a suspiciously orderly withdrawal, his guards forming a protective formation around him. "They're escaping," she realized. If Zoran spoke the truth, the evidence of conspiracy dies with Krell's departure. Before Eric could argue for prioritizing her safety, Liara made a decision. Standing tall, despite the chaos, she raised her voice to its full, ceremonial resonance, amplified by both the chamber's acoustics and the pulsing energy of her crystal. "Enough!" The command cut through the pandemonium like a physical force, causing many to freeze in place. "This is the sacred gathering. Will we allow fear and violence to desecrate what 17 millennia of tradition have established?" Her words, leveraging the very traditions her reforms sought to modify, had a powerful effect on the assembled representatives. The panic began to subside, replaced by a strange, tense order. "Security forces will secure this chamber," Liara continued, her authority absolute in that moment. "No one will depart until the threat is identified and neutralized." Her gaze fixed on the draconian delegation, which had halted its withdrawal, including those who may have knowledge of why Major Zoran was silenced. The High Chancellor, recognizing the restoration of order, quickly supported her command. "Seal all exits," he ordered the security forces. "Medical attention for the fallen, and full scanner sweeps of all levels." Eric remained at high alert, positioning himself to protect Liara while maintaining awareness of multiple potential threats. The assassination of Zoran in the middle of the gathering suggested either remarkable boldness or desperate fear. Neither boded well for Liara's safety. "We should withdraw to a secure position," he advised quietly. "No," Liara replied with firm conviction. "Retreating now would be interpreted as weakness or guilt. We must see this through." Security forces worked efficiently to secure the chamber, identifying and detaining a suspect in the upper gallery, a non-alliance species operative, whose presence raised serious questions about external interference in alliance affairs. Meanwhile, medical personnel confirmed what Eric had already suspected. Major Zoran was dead, killed instantly by a precision energy weapon designed to leave minimal evidence. As order was gradually restored, the High Chancellor reconvened the formal proceedings, though the ceremonial atmosphere had been irrevocably altered by violence and accusation. "In light of these extraordinary events," he announced, "the Council proposes a temporary recess of the gathering to allow for investigation of Major Zoran's allegations and the security breach that resulted in his death." "With respect, Chancellor," Liara interjected before he could conclude, "a recess would serve only those who wish to prevent open discussion of the issues before us. I propose instead that we continue with added security measures and address directly the concerns that have been raised." She turned to face the draconian delegation, her expression resolute. "War Master Krell, Major Zoran made specific accusations regarding an agreement between your military command and conservative factions within Archemia. I invite you to address these claims before the gathering." It was a masterful political move, offering the appearance of fair hearing while forcing the issue into the open before evidence could be concealed or witnesses silenced. Krell found himself in the impossible position of either denying allegations that might soon be proven true or admitting to conspiracy before the entire Alliance leadership. The War Master rose slowly, his scaled features arranged in an expression of dignified offense. Princess Liara, the Draconian hegemony has maintained honorable relations with Archemia for 12 millennia. These accusations from a clearly unstable individual insult that history of cooperation. Then you categorically deny any agreement regarding territorial concessions in the Nalaris sector? Liara pressed, her voice pleasant but unyielding. Krell's secondary eyelids flickered, a tell that Eric recognized from his military training as indicating stress in draconian physiology. The hegemony engages in many diplomatic discussions regarding sector development. I would need to consult our records regarding specific negotiations. Perhaps I can assist your memory, Liara suggested. She gestured, and the data crystals above the circle shifted to display new information, communication logs, resource surveys, and military deployment patterns around the Nalaris sector. These records, gathered by my own intelligence sources, show a curious pattern of draconian fleet movements, corresponding precisely with diplomatic overtures from conservative Archemia factions. The display was met with stunned silence, followed by renewed murmuring throughout the chamber. Liara had clearly prepared for this contingency, gathering evidence beyond what Zoran himself had possessed. Krell's crest extended fully, a sign of agitation he could no longer conceal. This is a fabrication intended to distract from the princess's radical agenda, he hissed. The draconian hegemony rejects these accusations and will not be manipulated into supporting reforms that undermine the natural order of species. His outburst, revealing both his opposition to Liara's reforms and his belief in species hierarchy, did more to confirm suspicion than any evidence could have. Throughout the chamber, representatives exchanged glances, re-evaluating their positions in light of the unfolding drama. Liara seized the moment. Honored representatives, she addressed the entire gathering. The events we have witnessed today, conspiracy, assassination, denial, are the inevitable results of a system that values power over justice, tradition over progress, hierarchy over equality. She moved to the center of the circle once more, her crystal pulsing with increased intensity. The reforms I propose are not radical. They are necessary, not destructive, but constructive. They seek not to erase our history, but to build upon it a more perfect union, where all member worlds contribute and benefit equally. As she spoke, Eric noticed a subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. Representatives who had initially appeared skeptical were listening with growing interest. The traditional factions, including Krell's Draconians, found themselves increasingly isolated as their opposition appeared self-serving in light of the exposed conspiracy. We stand at a pivotal moment in our shared history, Liara continued, her voice rising with passionate conviction. The choice before us is clear. Cling to hierarchies that breed resentment and conspiracy, or embrace a new vision of genuine cooperation among equals. She held up the small crystal heart once more. This simple gift, crafted by a child from a neglected colony, represents everything our alliance should be. Created from limited resources, yet offering unlimited hope. Imperfect in execution, yet perfect in intention. The future looking to us for wisdom and courage. Above them, the three moons began to shift from perfect alignment, the rare celestial event drawing to its conclusion. In Alliance tradition, agreements made during alignment carried special weight, giving Liara precious little time to secure support for her proposals. I ask you now, not as Archemia's princess, but as a citizen of our shared galaxy. Will you join me in building an alliance worthy of our highest ideals? Will you support reforms that distribute both power and responsibility more equitably among all member worlds? Will you stand with me against those who would maintain inequality through conspiracy and violence? The chamber fell silent as her words hung in the air, a moment of collective decision that would echo through history, regardless of its outcome. Eric watched the assembled representatives, reading the subtle signs of shifting alliance and calculation that preceded any major political realignment. Then, from an unexpected quarter, came the first response. A representative from one of the traditionally lower-tier worlds, a species Eric recognized as Tellurian, known for their cautious diplomacy, rose from their seat. "The Tellurian Confederation stands with Princess Liara," they declared, their crystalline voice resonating through the chamber. "For too long, we have accepted our designation as a developing member with limited council representation. If Archemia itself proposes a more equitable structure, who are we to refuse?" Another representative rose, this one from the Cyrene Collective, traditionally aligned with conservative factions. "The collective will evaluate these reforms with an open mind," they stated carefully. "Recent events suggest the current system may indeed harbor dangerous flaws." One by one, representatives from throughout the alliance indicated varying degrees of support or willingness to consider Liara's proposals. Not universal acceptance. Many traditional powers maintained opposition, but sufficient momentum to ensure the reforms would receive serious consideration rather than summary dismissal. The High Chancellor, reading the chamber's mood with political acumen, honed over centuries, made a decisive pronouncement. "The Council recognizes that Princess Liara's proposals have generated significant interest across alliance factions. A special committee will be formed to develop implementation frameworks, with representatives from all tier designations included." It wasn't complete victory, but it represented a critical first step, official recognition that reform was necessary and inevitable. As the moon separated overhead, the gathering began to transition toward its concluding ceremonies, though with considerably less ritual precision than tradition demanded after the day's tumultuous events. Throughout it all, Eric maintained his protective position at Liara's side, vigilant for any further threats while marveling at her political skill. She had transformed crisis into opportunity, using the exposed conspiracy to strengthen support for her reforms, rather than allowing it to derail them. As the formal proceedings concluded, and representatives began departing for their respective diplomatic quarters, Liara finally allowed herself a moment of relative privacy with Eric. They moved to a small antechamber off the main ceremonial space, accompanied by a minimal security detail that remained discreetly at the perimeter. "You did it," Eric said simply, profound respect evident in his tone. "Began it," Liara corrected, though a smile of genuine satisfaction brightened her features. "Implementation will face resistance at every stage. The traditional powers won't surrender privilege easily, regardless of what they said publicly today. But they can no longer pretend the current system serves the greater good," Eric pointed out. Not after Zoran's accusations were so dramatically confirmed by Krell's reaction. "A high price for that confirmation," Liara noted, her expression sobering as she recalled the Major's death. Whatever his crimes, Zoran believed he was serving Archemia. His understanding was flawed, but his loyalty in his own way was genuine. Eric considered this thoughtfully. Perhaps that's the tragedy of rigid hierarchies. They convince good people to defend bad systems, to see change as threat rather than opportunity. Liara looked at him with renewed appreciation. "You continue to surprise me with your insights, Guardian Stone. One might almost suspect you've spent your life contemplating political philosophy rather than security protocols." "I've had considerable time to observe power dynamics from the outside," he replied with a slight smile. "It provides a certain clarity of perspective." Before she could respond, the antechamber door opened to admit her Uncle Talon, accompanied by two ceremonial attendants. The elderly Valar's expression was unreadable, though his crystal pulsed with a steady rhythm that suggested controlled emotion rather than serene acceptance. "Niece," he greeted Liara with formal correctness. "The Council wishes to inform you that emergency protocols have been implemented regarding the Draconian delegation. War Master Krell and his senior advisors have been placed under diplomatic restriction pending investigation of Major Zoran's allegations." "A prudent measure," Liara acknowledged. And the committee to examine my reform proposals? Being formed now, Talon confirmed, though Eric detected reluctance beneath his formal tone. The council has requested that I serve as Archemia's representative to ensure our world's interests are properly considered. The statement revealed volumes about the political maneuvering already underway. By assigning Talon, a known traditionalist, to the committee, the conservative factions hoped to moderate or delay the most substantial reforms. Liara, however, merely smiled. An excellent choice, Uncle. Your extensive experience with alliance protocols will be invaluable in identifying which traditions should be preserved and which have outlived their purpose. The diplomatic counter was subtle but effective, framing Talon's role as supporting reform rather than obstructing it, making it more difficult for him to oppose changes without appearing obstructionist. There is another matter, Talon continued, his gaze shifting briefly to Eric before returning to Liara. The royal house has taken note of your unconventional security arrangements during today's proceedings. While the immediate crisis justified certain protocol adjustments, the council expects traditional formalities to resume for subsequent ceremonial functions. It was a direct challenge to Liara's symbolic placement of Eric beside her, rather than behind, an attempt to reinstate the hierarchical positioning that reflected the very system she sought to reform. I appreciate the council's concern for tradition, Liara replied smoothly. However, I must point out that my security arrangements fall under royal prerogative, rather than council jurisdiction. Guardian Stone will continue to serve in the capacity I have designated. Eric maintained his professional composure, though inwardly he admired her unwillingness to concede even this seemingly minor point. The symbolism of his position, a human standing as equal to Archemia royalty, was too powerful to abandon. Talon's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. Your father, the king, may have different views on this matter when he arrives tomorrow for the closing ceremonies. I look forward to discussing it with him, Liara replied with perfect poise. Along with the evidence of draconian conspiracy and the preliminary committee findings regarding alliance restructuring, recognizing that he would make no further progress, Talon offered a formal bow and departed with his attendants. When the door closed behind them, Liara released a small sigh. And so the next phase begins, she said, a hint of weariness finally showing through her composed exterior. The public battle won. The private war commences. You anticipated this, Eric observed. Of course. Reform is never a single victory but a series of ongoing engagements. She touched the crystal at her throat, which had dimmed slightly as her energy reserves depleted after the intense ceremonial performance. But we've achieved something significant today. For the first time in centuries, genuine structural change is openly on the Alliance agenda. Eric nodded, understanding the magnitude of the accomplishment. What happens next? Committee deliberations, factional negotiations, public messaging campaigns. Liara smiled ruefully. The less glamorous, but equally essential work of transformation, and all while navigating the inevitable counterattacks from those who see their privilege threatened. Including further assassination attempts, Eric added grimly. Zoran's death demonstrates how far certain factions will go to preserve the status quo, which is why I'll continue to need a guardian I can trust absolutely. Liara's violet eyes held his with unexpected intensity. If you're willing to remain in that role, despite the increased dangers, the question carried layers of meaning beyond the obvious request for continued protection. In the short time since their journey began, their relationship had evolved from formal distance to something neither could easily define, a connection that transcended professional duty without fitting any conventional category. I made my choice on Athros Station, Eric replied simply. I stand with you and your vision for a more equitable alliance. That hasn't changed. Relief and something deeper softened Liara's features. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then, with characteristic determination, she straightened her shoulders. "We should prepare for tomorrow's sessions. My father's arrival will complicate matters considerably. He's not opposed to reform in principle, but he values stability above all else." "One challenge at a time," Eric advised. "You've achieved more today than most thought possible. The momentum is with you now." As they left the antechamber to return to the royal quarters, Eric remained vigilant for external threats while contemplating the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. From disgraced Earth officer, to royal guardian, to participant in historic alliance reform. A path he could never have anticipated when he first met the princess he was assigned to protect. Whatever challenges lay ahead, political opposition, violent resistance, or the complex evolution of his relationship with Liara, he faced them now, not merely as a dutiful guardian, but as a committed partner in the creation of a more just galactic order. The ancient stars of the Alliance capital glittered through the massive viewports as they walked, unchanging witnesses to the endless cycle of tradition and transformation that defined civilization across the vastness of space. Tonight, perhaps for the first time in millennia, that balance had shifted perceptibly toward change. The royal reception hall glittered with 1,000 points of light, crystalline chandeliers casting prismatic patterns across the assembled dignitaries who had gathered for the final, ceremonial function of the Moonlight Gathering. Representatives from throughout the Alliance circulated in formal attire that ranged from the elegantly minimalist to the extravagantly ornate, depending on their species' cultural traditions. Eric stood at his now customary position slightly to Liara's right, no longer behind her as tradition would have dictated, but beside her as equal partner in the diplomatic dance. His formal guardian's uniform had been modified at Liara's insistence, the previously subordinate silver accents now expanded and incorporated with the royal purple of Archemia, visually elevating his status in the subtle language of Alliance fashion. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of political activity following the dramatic events in the ceremonial chamber. War Master Krell remained under diplomatic restriction, though the draconian hegemony had sent replacement representatives who were carefully distancing themselves from their predecessors' apparent conspiracy. The Reform Committee had convened its first session, with Talon predictably advocating for minimal changes, while representatives from traditionally marginalized worlds pushed for more comprehensive restructuring. Most significantly, King Terran Villar, Liara's father and ruler of Archemia, had arrived with his royal entourage to attend the closing ceremonies. His reaction to his daughter's controversial proposals remained carefully neutral in public, though Eric had observed the tense private conversation between father and daughter earlier that day. "He's watching us again," Liara murmured now, her lips barely moving as she maintained a pleasant expression for the benefit of passing dignitaries. Eric didn't need to ask who she meant. The king stood across the hall, engaged in conversation with Alliance officials, but occasionally glancing toward his daughter and her unconventional guardian. Unlike Talon's obvious disapproval, the king's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts, a political skill developed over centuries of rule. "Your father is difficult to read," Eric observed quietly. "Intentionally so," Liara confirmed. "He believes true power lies in keeping others uncertain of your position until the optimal moment for revelation. A strategy you chose not to employ with your reforms." A small smile touched her lips. "I learned as much from rejecting my father's methods as from embracing them. Sometimes, bold transparency accomplishes what subtle manipulation cannot." Their conversation was interrupted as a delegation from one of the outer colony worlds approached. Representatives from Nalaris itself, the home of the child who had given Liara the crystal heart that now occupied a place of honor in her ceremonial regalia. "Princess Liara," their leader greeted her with profound respect. "The people of Nalaris extend their deepest gratitude for your advocacy. For generations, Our concerns have been dismissed as peripheral to Alliance interests. Today, for the first time, we have hope for genuine change. The credit belongs to your people as much as to me, Liara replied graciously. Particularly to young Elara, whose gift reminded everyone present of what truly matters in our shared future. As the conversation continued, Eric maintained his vigilant observation of the reception hall, while reflecting on the remarkable diplomatic skill Liara displayed. She engaged with each delegation as though they were the most important in the room, regardless of their traditional status in the Alliance hierarchy. The representatives from traditionally lower-tier worlds received the same attention and respect as those from founding members, a living demonstration of the equality her reforms proposed. When the Nalaris delegation moved on, Liara accepted a crystal flute of ceremonial nectar from a passing attendant. "The committee deliberations begin in earnest tomorrow," she noted quietly to Eric. "Thailand has already assembled a coalition of traditionalists to dilute the most substantial reforms." "Expected but still disappointing," Eric replied. "After Zoran's revelations, I had hoped for less resistance. Crisis creates opportunity for change but doesn't guarantee it." Liara sipped the iridescent liquid thoughtfully. The exposed conspiracy weakened the opposition temporarily, but entrenched power recovers quickly from setbacks. Before Eric could respond, the ambient lighting shifted subtly, a ceremonial signal that the formal proceedings were about to begin. The assembled dignitaries moved toward the center of the hall, where King Terran had taken his position on the royal dais. Unlike Liara's reform-minded approach to ceremony, the king embraced the full traditional pageantry of his position. His attire was magnificent even by Archemia standards. Layered robes of luminescent fabric that seemed to capture and amplify the light around him, with the ancient crown of 17 millennia resting upon his brow. The crystal at his throat, larger and more intricately faceted than Liara's, pulsed with steady blue-white light that signified both power and stability. Liara moved to take her place on the smaller dais beside her father's, with Eric maintaining his position at her side despite the disapproving glances from traditional court members. The symbolism was unmistakable. The reformist princess and her human partner standing literally and figuratively adjacent to traditional authority. "Representatives of the Alliance," King Terran began, his voice carrying the full harmonic resonance of royal velar speech. "We gather to conclude what history will undoubtedly record as a most consequential moonlight gathering." His gaze swept the assembled dignitaries, betraying nothing of his personal feelings about the dramatic events and controversial proposals that had dominated the proceedings. For 17 millennia, the Alliance has endured through adherence to tradition, tempered by necessary adaptation. The balance between preservation and progress defines our shared civilization. Too much change brings instability, while too little ensures stagnation. Eric noted the subtle framing, presenting change and tradition as opposing forces, requiring careful balance rather than complementary aspects of healthy development. The king was establishing his centrist position between the conservative factions and Liara's reform movement. "Recent events have demonstrated both the strength of our institutions and the challenges we continue to face as a united alliance." The king continued. "The exposure of potential conspiracy reminds us that we must remain vigilant against those who would undermine our collective security for factional advantage. A diplomatic acknowledgement of the Zoran incident without directly implicating the draconian hegemony. Masterful political navigation that maintained alliance stability while recognizing the validity of the concerns raised. Equally important are the proposals for structural reform introduced by Princess Liara." The king acknowledged, inclining his head slightly toward his daughter. "The committee established to evaluate these proposals represents our commitment to thoughtful consideration of new perspectives, particularly those from traditionally underrepresented worlds." Eric glanced at Liara, noting the careful neutrality of her expression. The king's statement offered ceremonial recognition without substantive endorsement, neither embracing nor rejecting her reforms, but placing them within the context of thoughtful consideration rather than urgent implementation. As we conclude this gathering and return to our respective worlds, I call upon all representatives to reflect on the dual imperatives of our shared civilization, honoring the wisdom embedded in our traditions while remaining open to innovations that strengthen our collective future. The speech continued with formal acknowledgments of various delegations and ceremonial expressions of alliance unity. Throughout, the king maintained perfect diplomatic balance, acknowledging concerns from all factions without committing to specific policy directions. When the formal address concluded, ceremonial attendants moved through the hall with the traditional vessels of commitment, ancient artifacts in which representatives placed symbolic tokens, signifying their world's continued allegiance to alliance principles. The ritual dated back to the founding Concord and carried deep cultural significance for most member species. As the ceremony proceeded, Eric maintained his vigilance while observing the subtle political currents flowing through the reception. The traditional factions clustered around Talon and other conservative leaders, while representatives from Outer Worlds and newer alliance members gravitated toward Liara. The division was becoming increasingly visible, no longer hidden behind ceremonial unity, but emerging as an open ideological split. When the ritual concluded, the reception transitioned to its final phase, less formal interaction before representatives departed for their respective worlds. The king descended from his dais, moving among the delegations with practiced diplomatic skill, while Liara did the same in another section of the hall. Eric remained close to Liara, alert for any security threats while also serving as a symbolic reminder of her commitment to species equality. He noticed that many representatives who had previously avoided direct interaction with humans now made a point of including him in their conversations with the princess, a small but significant shift in behavioral patterns. As the evening progressed, Eric observed a subtle movement among the royal security detail. The king's personal guards were redistributing themselves throughout the hall in what appeared to be a standard security protocol, but struck Eric's trained eye as potentially significant. He tracked their movements carefully, noting that several had positioned themselves near exits. "Something's happening," he murmured to Liara during a brief moment between delegation meetings. She followed his gaze, her political instincts immediately registering the pattern. "My father is preparing to make a move," she concluded. "But what?" They didn't have to wait long for an answer. After completing his circuit of the reception hall, King Terran returned to his dais and activated the ceremonial chime that called for attention. Conversations ceased as representatives turned expectantly toward the Archemia monarch. "Honored delegates," the king began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed hall. "Before we conclude this historic gathering, there is one final matter I wish to address." Eric tensed slightly, positioning himself to respond to any scenario, from political declaration to security threat. Beside him, Liara maintained perfect composure, though he could sense her heightened alertness. "The events of recent days have demonstrated that we stand at a pivotal moment in Alliance history," the king continued. "Traditions that have served us for millennia now face legitimate questions about their continued relevance in a rapidly evolving galactic community." He gestured toward Liara. "My daughter, Princess Liara, has presented a vision of alliance restructuring that challenges many of our fundamental assumptions about governance and species relations. Her proposals have generated significant discussion, some supportive, some critical, all necessary for thoughtful evaluation." The hall remained absolutely silent, representatives from all factions aware that they were witnessing a potentially decisive moment in the reform debate. The king's position, previously maintained as studiously neutral, would likely tip the balance one way or the other. "After careful consideration and consultation with the High Council," the king announced, "I have reached a decision regarding Archemia's formal position on these proposals." Eric could feel the tension radiating from Liara despite her outward calm. This was the moment that would either validate her vision or undermine it at the highest level. "Effective immediately," the king declared. "I am appointing Princess Liara as Archemia's formal representative to the Reform Committee, with plenipotentiary authority to negotiate on behalf of our world." Murmurs swept through the hall. This was far more than ceremonial acknowledgement. By granting Liara plenipotentiary status, the king was effectively endorsing her authority to pursue reforms without requiring further royal approval for each proposed change. "Furthermore," he continued, "in recognition of the unique perspective that contributed to these proposals, I am creating a new position within the Royal Advisory Council." The king's gaze shifted to Eric, who maintained his professional composure despite his surprise at suddenly becoming the focus of royal attention. "Guardian Eric Stone of Earth, step forward." Eric exchanged a quick glance with Liara, who appeared as surprised as he was by this unexpected development. Following protocol, he moved to stand before the royal dais, bowing with the precise degree of respect appropriate for addressing the monarch. "Your service to the crown of Archemia has demonstrated qualities that transcend traditional expectations," the king stated formally. "Your courage, loyalty, and perspective have proven valuable not merely in physical protection, but in advancing our understanding of alliance dynamics." The king raised his hand, and a royal attendant stepped forward, bearing a ceremonial medallion, unlike any Eric had seen before. Silver and purple like his modified uniform, but inlaid with the royal insignia typically reserved for official council members. "I hereby appoint you Second Royal Sentinel of Archemia, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereof," the king pronounced. "This position carries equivalent rank to High Council membership and includes formal advisory status on all matters of alliance policy." The pronouncement sent shockwaves through the assembly. Never in alliance history had a human been elevated to such a position within one of the founding world's governance structures. The symbolic significance was enormous, not merely accepting Liara's reforms in principle, but implementing their core philosophy of species equality at the highest level of Archemia's leadership. As the medallion was placed around his neck, Eric maintained his composed exterior, while inwardly processing the extraordinary implications of this appointment. The position of Royal Sentinel was ancient and honored, traditionally held by the most trusted advisors with both protective and political responsibilities. "Rise, Sentinel Stone," the king instructed. "Take your place in the royal circle." As Eric rose and moved to the position indicated, directly within the royal inner circle, rather than adjacent to it, he caught Liara's expression. Behind her diplomatic mask, her eyes shone with undisguised joy and triumph. This was more than personal validation for her trust in him. It was institutional endorsement of the principle that ability rather than species should determine position. "The path of reform is never smooth or simple." The king addressed the assembly once more. "It requires both visionary leadership and pragmatic implementation. By appointing Princess Liara as our reform representative and Sentinel Stone as royal advisor, Archemia demonstrates its commitment to meaningful evolution of the alliance structure, change that honors our shared history while creating a more equitable future." The political masterstroke became clear to Eric as he observed the reactions throughout the hall. By embracing reform while maintaining control of its implementation, the king had effectively prevented more radical factions from claiming leadership of the movement, while simultaneously denying conservatives the ability to dismiss the proposals as fringe ideas. He had positioned Archemia at the center of the coming changes, ensuring the ancient world would guide rather than resist the transformation. As the ceremony concluded and representatives came forward to offer congratulations, Eric found himself in the unprecedented position of receiving formal acknowledgement from alliance officials who had previously barely acknowledged his existence. The medallion at his neck, symbol of his new status, seemed to alter the very reality around him, transforming how he was perceived and addressed. When the diplomatic necessities had been observed and the reception began to disperse, Eric finally had a moment alone with Liara in a small antechamber off the main hall. "Did you know?" he asked immediately, still processing the king's unexpected announcement. "Not in the slightest," she admitted, her formal facade giving way to genuine wonder. "My father keeps his most significant decisions closely guarded until the moment of revelation. This was—" she shook her head, searching for words. "This was unprecedented." "A political calculation," Eric suggested, though without cynicism. "Supporting your reforms while ensuring Archemia maintains control of their implementation? Yes, but the manner of support matters as much as the fact of it," Liara pointed out. "He could have endorsed the general principles while insisting on traditional leadership. Instead, he not only appointed me as plenipotentiary representative, but elevated you to sentinel status, the most dramatic possible statement about species equality." She moved closer, her violet eyes searching his face. "Do you understand what this means, Eric? No human has ever held such a position in Archemia's governance. The sentinel rank places you above most of the noble houses in the formal hierarchy." "I understand the symbolism," he acknowledged, "though I'm less clear on the practical responsibilities." A smile touched her lips. "Traditionally, the royal sentinel serves as both protector and advisor, the monarch's most trusted companion in matters of both security and policy." Her expression softened. "In many ways, it formalizes what you have already become to me during our journey." The admission hung between them, acknowledging the evolution of their relationship from formal guardian and royal charge to something far more complex and meaningful. Before either could elaborate further, however, the antechamber door opened to admit King Terran himself, accompanied by a single ceremonial attendant who remained discreetly by the door. Both Eric and Liara straightened immediately, offering the formal acknowledgments that protocol demanded. The king dismissed these with a gentle gesture, his regal bearing somewhat relaxed now that the public ceremonies had concluded. "I imagine you have questions," he said, addressing both of them with unexpected informality. "Several, Father," Liara confirmed. "Though gratitude precedes curiosity, your support for the reforms was more substantial than I had dared hope." The king's expression softened slightly as he regarded his daughter. "Did you truly believe I would oppose changes so clearly necessary? I may value tradition, Liara, but I am not blind to the Alliance's evolving needs." "You've never indicated support for such fundamental restructuring," she pointed out. "Quite the contrary, in fact." "Because radical change requires perfect timing," the king replied. "Propose reforms too early, and entrenched interests unite to smother them in their infancy. Too late, and instability has already progressed beyond peaceful resolution." He moved to the chamber's small viewport, gazing out at the Alliance capital, with its ancient structures illuminated against the darkness of space. "You created the perfect moment, daughter. The exposed conspiracy, the public debate, the groundswell of support from outer worlds. You transformed what might have been dismissed as idealistic theory into necessary response to immediate threat." The assessment was delivered with unmistakable pride, though tempered with the measured tone of a monarch addressing policy, rather than a father addressing his child. "And my appointment as sentinel?" Eric asked directly, still processing the implications of his new status. The king turned to him, studying him with ancient eyes that had witnessed centuries of Alliance politics. "Also, perfectly timed. The principle of species equality needed more than verbal endorsement. It required visible, institutional implementation at the highest level." A slight smile touched the king's lips. "Besides, I've reviewed your service record extensively. Sentinel Stone, before Earth's military, during the Orion conflict, and subsequently in Archemia's service. Your capabilities have been consistently underutilized due to prejudice rather than performance. The Sentinel position merely recognizes qualities that should have been acknowledged long ago. The pragmatic honesty was refreshing after the careful diplomatic language that had dominated the public ceremonies. Eric found himself appreciating the king's direct approach, which reminded him somewhat of Liara's own straightforward style beneath her ceremonial persona. "There is another consideration," the king continued, his expression growing more serious. "The conspiracy exposed by Major Zorin, unfortunate in his methods, but correct in his identification of draconian involvement, represents a genuine threat to alliance stability. The reforms must proceed, but so must heightened security around their implementation." He looked between Eric and Liara, his gaze measured but intense. "You will face resistance, political, certainly, but potentially physical as well. Those who ordered Zorin's assassination within the ceremonial chamber itself will not hesitate to target the primary advocates of reform." "We're aware of the risks," Liara assured him. "Awareness is not preparation," the king countered. "As Sentinel, Eric now has authority to access Archemia's full security resources and implement protective measures without requiring prior approval through traditional channels. I expect this authority to be exercised thoroughly." The instruction was delivered to Eric directly, monarch to Sentinel, with clear expectation of compliance. "Understood, Your Majesty," he replied without hesitation. The king nodded, satisfied with the response. "The Reform Committee begins its substantive work tomorrow. You will both represent Archemia's interests, Liara as plenipotentiary negotiator, Eric as security advisor, with particular insight into how proposals will affect traditionally marginalized worlds." His gaze lingered on his daughter. "The path you've chosen is difficult, Liara. Changing systems that have endured for millennia requires both vision and practical wisdom. Remember that implementation matters as much as ideals. Reforms that cannot be realistically adopted serve no one." "I understand, Father," Liara replied, her tone respectful but resolute. "I seek evolution, not revolution, change that strengthens the alliance rather than fracturing it." The king seemed satisfied with this answer. "Then I leave matters in capable hands." He turned to depart, then paused at the doorway. "One final observation, if I may." His gaze moved between them, noting something neither had said aloud. "The bond that forms between monarch and sentinel traditionally transcends formal duty. History suggests such connections, when genuine, serve both individuals and the realm they protect." With that cryptic comment, delivered with the faintest suggestion of personal rather than political interest, the king departed, leaving Eric and Liara alone once more in the antechamber. "Was that," Eric began, uncertain how to interpret the king's final remark. "Royal acknowledgement of personal matters?" Liara finished, a smile touching her lips. "I believe it was. My father has always been more perceptive than he reveals publicly." The observation hung between them, neither quite ready to directly address the unspoken aspect of their relationship that had evolved alongside their political partnership. Instead, Liara moved to the viewport, gazing out at the Alliance capital with its ancient structures and teeming diversity. "Tomorrow it begins in earnest," she said softly. "The real work of transformation, complex, challenging, and absolutely necessary." Eric joined her at the viewport, the Royal Sentinel medallion at his throat catching the starlight. "Not alone," he reminded her, his voice equally quiet. "Whatever challenges come, we face them together." Liara turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting both the determination that had driven her reforms and something deeper, more personal. "Together," she agreed, reaching out to take his hand in a gesture that bridged royal protocol and human connection. As it was meant to be. Outside the viewport, the three moons of the Alliance capital continued their eternal dance. no longer in perfect alignment, but still moving in cosmic harmony. Like the moons, Liara and Eric had found their own alignment. Different worlds, following connected paths, creating between them a balance of vision and pragmatism, idealism and experience, tradition and change. The reforms they championed would face resistance, require compromise, and demand perseverance in the months and years ahead. The transformation of a system millennia in the making could not be accomplished quickly or easily. But in this moment, with the first critical steps taken and their path forward clear, the future held more promise than peril. Eric Stone had begun this journey as merely a guardian assigned to protect a princess. He ended it as royal sentinel, advisor, and something more personal that transcended formal titles. A partner in the creation of a more equitable alliance and in Liara's life. The human had indeed given the alien princess his heart, and in return, she had given him purpose, position, and a place in a universe that had long denied his true value. Together, they would build a future where such gifts were available to all, regardless of species or origin, a legacy worthy of both Archemia's ancient wisdom and humanity's resilient spirit. As stars glittered in the vastness beyond the viewport, Liara's crystal and Eric's medallion pulsed with synchronized light, different in origin but harmonized in purpose, like the two souls who wore them on this night of endings and beginnings at the heart of a changing galaxy.